Yeah, he's the new manager.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is the October 6, 2021 workshop meeting for the Scarborough Town Council. This will run from 5:30 to approximately 6:50. And we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we will convene our regular town council meeting at 7 p.m. Today's workshop essentially has, it has one agenda item. It is, about 3 years ago, we entered into an agreement with Crossroad Holdings to develop the Downs area, which is at this point everybody's well aware of. But with that became a creation of a TIF district, and the TIF district runs from Scarborough Downs area to Oak Hill and almost everywhere in between. And because we were so consumed with the credit enhancement agreement 3 years ago, we didn't quite take the time to explore the advantages, challenges, and opportunities of the actual TIF district itself. So one of the things the current council has been mindful of is to try to have a little bit more of a forward-thinking approach with our financing. And when we look at our budget year over year, try to make decisions that are rooted in more than just the year ahead of us, but perhaps more of a long-term vision. So this workshop is nothing but a continuing exercise in trying to educate all of us in the ins and outs of a TIF district and what it means for us. It is going to be free flowing. There's really the objective really is to educate all of us and to help that inform our decisions. We have Shauna Milton Muller with us today from Drummond and Bernstein and Shore.
Blasphemy.
I should know that. You're just Shauna to me.
That's okay.
And she helped us out at the finance committee level. We had a very productive TIF 101 in finance about a month ago, and today will be TIF 102. So just a tiny bit half step forward. Mr. Town Manager, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I would just encourage any member of council who has not seen that TIF discussion, which was held at the finance committee on, August 25th. It's a good primer to this. And certainly I make that recommendation out to the public as well. And in fact, this presentation and discussion tonight really kind of picks up 3/4 of the way through that discussion. And our intent is really to focus on the shelter benefits and really kind of being more strategic and forward thinking about how we can maximize the benefits of the downtown TIF district in particular. But I think much of the conversation applies to TIF districts generally. The downtown district is the one that exists. It consumes about 1,000 acres, and it's where the development is likely to occur in the next foreseeable future for sure. So I think practically speaking, the conversation really will probably gravitate back to the downtown district. So as was mentioned, we do have Shauna Cook-Mueller here with us this evening. Karen Martin will have a component as well, really talking about potential uses of TIF revenues. And I think that's where it starts to get real for us in terms of, what can we actually relate to? What are we spending money on today that we could actually use TIF revenues to provide for within the statute? And then our assessor, Nick Cloutier, is here. He's done a number of different modeling scenarios, which again, I think will be illustrative in terms of changing the different dynamics and what sort of benefits may accrue from those decisions. So we're really here at your disposal. We do have a presentation that Sean is going to walk us through, and then Karen and Nick will kind of tag on the end. We do want it to be open and interactive, so please stop us. The point of this is to really broaden the understanding. So by all means, speak up if you have questions. So Shauna, do you want to start?
Happy to start.
Just to interrupt that, I'm sorry. Do you guys prefer that we interrupt you as you go, or do you want to get through everything? Or I just want to make sure as the presenters, you're cool either way?
I'm happy with being interrupted.
Okay, all right. Just want to make sure. Okay, cool. Let me pull that up and we'll.
It's useful for each of you.
Yep, absolutely. And for anybody at the table, just don't go through me. Just raise your hand and one of the presenters will see you and we'll have the conversations. So questions can go directed straight to our panelists.
Well, as you're pulling that up, thank you again for having me back. I love to come and talk about this stuff with folks who are actually interested, unlike my family. So, so I've titled tonight's presentation "Financial Opportunity and Tax Increment Financing," because I think that's really what we're trying to drill down on for the town of Scarborough here. And what I plan to talk us through is first a very brief introduction and then get into tax shift benefit, what it is and how it works, and talk through some scenarios of how the tax shift benefit is implemented and can work. And then I will start to get into how TIF revenues can be spent under the TIF statute. And I'll hand it on over to Karen as she's done some work in terms of looking at the town of Scarborough's budget and sort of how the statutory requirements and the budget items that you already have marry up. So many of you have seen this introduction slide, but really just to frame this up for everybody, we're talking about tax increment financing. It's an economic development tool available to municipalities whereby you can designate an area in your town as a TIF district, and it essentially freezes the value, and all the value that is paid, all the value that is added rather to the district from that point forward during the term is what's called captured value. And the taxes paid on the captured value can be put aside in a development program fund for special projects related to economic development. At the end of the TIF district term, you've got all of that value back onto the general fund tax rolls. And so that's one way we try to illustrate how TIFs work. And I also just want to orient everyone to the district that was brought up in the introductory remarks, Scarborough's downtown omnibus TIF district. It's a significant sized district compared to any other that the town has had before, and presents a significant amount of opportunity for the town. Okay, so let's get into tax shift benefits. So many of you have heard me say this introductory part before, but let's put TIFs to the side and talk about state valuation for a minute. State valuation is your total amount of value in the town, and it gets equalized across the state at the state level so that your assessment ratio can be adjusted across municipalities. And the state wants to do that to set some equalized state valuation for each municipality so that they can use that in various formulas. Three of the most important formulas where it's used is in calculating the state education subsidies, the revenue sharing subsidies, and then your county uses it in determining how much county tax each municipality pays to the county. The theory being that as you grow in your value in your municipality, you have a better ability to pay for things on your own. You don't need as much subsidy, and you can pay more in county tax. Lots of other things going into those formulas, and so which I'll get into. But the important piece is that in a tax increment financing district, the value that's captured in a TIF is not counted toward the state valuation. And as a result, and we'll get into this, the town doesn't experience financial losses of a portion of that new tax value that it otherwise would. So that's really what we're going to be talking about in more detail. Before we get into that, I just thought I'd talk through these three components of financial impacts for the municipality. And general purpose aid is one of those. So there's a statewide education mill rate that is created at the state level by the Department of Education each year. And it is applied to the average of the town's last 3 years state valuations. That is, that math problem results in the amount of the essential programs and services budget that the town will be responsible for paying. And then the difference between that budget and the amount the town's responsible for paying is meant to be the amount of the subsidy. There is an exception to this, which many of you are familiar with, which is the minimum receiver status. So to the extent a municipality has a relatively high special education cost compared to your subsidy calculation, sometimes municipalities are then bumped up in their subsidy amount to a percentage of the special education cost. When that happens, and when that's called minimum receiver status, then the state valuation up for the community is not actually driving your general purpose aid amount. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, but because the town of Scarborough has been in minimum receiver status and is no longer in minimum receiver status, it changes the impact of capturing value in the TIF district or not. Remember, you can interrupt me. So if I start going, no one said a word. So yes.
So you are going to cover like what created the shift from the past year and why we moved out of minimal receiver status and.
So I'm not going to cover that specifically. And maybe Tom could speak to it a little bit, the dynamics that led to it. And if not, we can certainly get back to it. But it does have to do with the percentage of the essential programs and services budget that is comprised of special education costs and its relative amount to the subsidy that is otherwise calculated in the formula.
I actually would defer to Councillor Clucci. He's really become, I think it's a bit of a hobby or an interest, it seems, but it's really become quite adept at understanding those mechanics. And I think better than I could succinctly describe what occurred in this last year that brought us out of that status.
Well, I mean, this year is because the governor increased the funding for education. So she moved it to closer to 55%, which we were teetering on the line of that mill rate applied versus what our special education last year was. They were pretty close to each other. So that just put us over the edge this year. And that could change in the future, but I don't think it'll change in the near term anyways.
Yeah, my understanding is that the town has been in minimum receiver status, but not by a huge margin, right? So it's always sort of on the edge, and it has a real big impact on the tax shift impact. So, which we will get to that.
I hate to try. I had a question. So let's say that we have our TIF district, and we don't allow another building to be built in the next 10 years. We're still capturing value because when we do a reassessment, the original value is going to be the original value, right? And I guess I'm trying to make a point to reaffirm this, but so there's benefit even if you're not going to grow to capturing value because it's essentially free money.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, particularly with a really large district. You're going to see some increased assessed value, even if you don't see a significant amount of development. And a significant portion of the district is already developed, right? So you're not going to see a change there in terms of development value, but you will, and Nick can speak to whether, what the amount might be of just sort of regular inflation, I guess, of assessed values.
And in fact, I don't want to get into the weeds, but the timing of the downtown district happened to coincide with the town's revaluation. And with that knowledge, the council at the time decided to, in the state statute allows for us to call out and say, we want to use a certain date as our starting point. And the council chose to use purposely a date that already had the increased values as a result of the revaluation included, because there would have been kind of an intrinsic, almost windfall value created by virtue of the revaluation in year one. Essentially.
Yeah, that can confuse a lot of people, but we have an original assessed value date from the statute that was here. And we decided we're actually going to, for measurement purposes, we're going to start here because this is after reval. And we wanted that amount to be available. The council at the time wanted that amount to be available to the general fund. But there continues to be increased assessments over time, not by virtue of development. But
right, over the term of this TIF district, there'll be 3, 4, 5 revals potentially. And so that.
Well, I'm saying because prices are up, what, 25% this year, somewhere around that. It's substantial. So the next time we do a reval, it'll be a pretty big impact, I think.
Great. Okay. So I was just going to speak to the formulas for county tax and municipal revenue sharing just briefly. County tax is a very simple formula. It's entirely the town's proportional share of the county budget is entirely based on the proportion of the town valuation compared to the rest of the county. So that's a fairly simple calculation compared to education aid. And then revenue sharing, that calculation and formula, it also has lots of different inputs. The kind of general relationship still holds. As you have more value, you get less revenue sharing than you otherwise would. But there are other components that go into that, not the least of which is how much the state decides to provide and in a total sense. So you may remember me providing a dollar sign slide before. Based on this year's data, this shows how much of every dollar in new tax revenue from a new development is lost over time to these tax shift losses. And based on today's data, assuming that the town, today the town is not a minimum receiver, that 49% of every new dollar, 49 cents of every new dollar is lost to losses in the education aid subsidy. And then there's also some impacts related to county tax and revenue sharing, but by the largest part, of course, is state education aid. So it is about 58 cents that's lost out of every new tax dollar to tax shift losses. And this is the state where you have not captured this value in a TIF district. And just as a comparison, the next slide shows, let's just say the town was a minimum receiver this year. There would still be a tax shift loss. It would just be related to the county tax and revenue sharing subsidy components. So you don't experience a significant amount of losses in that scenario. So the next few slides are trying to give you some more visuals to explain this dynamic. And so what we decided to do was talk about a hypothetical $10 million project that could be located in one of three areas. The first area is in the down CEA area of the downtown TIF district, where it's subject to a credit enhancement agreement. The second scenario is you're in the downtown TIF district with this $10 million project, but it's not subject to the credit enhancement agreement. And then the third scenario is this project is not in a TIF district at all. And this is today's TIF district, where there is a 40% reimbursement under the credit enhancement agreement. And then the rest of the TIF district has a 3%, well, that area and the rest of the TIF district has a 3% capture for municipal purposes. The rest of the increased assessed value in the TIF district is going to the general fund, just like you would be if you were outside the TIF district. So you can see in the Downs area, subject to the CEA, that scenario has about $60,000 of the new tax revenue going to the credit enhancement agreement payment. You've got about $49,000 that is lost in the tax shift losses because you've got a significant amount that is going to the general fund. And then you've got a net benefit to the town of $40,000. And that is what's available mostly in the general fund, but a small component of that amount is going to the town TIF development program fund, available for the couple of projects that we did get approved in the first in the TIF district when it was originally designated.
Do we know, maybe this is a question for Tom, what percentage of the downtown TIF is in the Downs?
Roughly half. It's
Yeah.
about 1,000 acres and the Downs is about 500 acres.
Okay.
And Shauna, it would be about what, $1,200 out of that $40,000? Because the 3% capture is not on your bar graph here, correct?
Right, I didn't separate that out. You will be able to tell, but yeah, it's
that's
a
fine.
couple $1,000s
It'd be-
at most.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah,
Of the 40, a couple thousand is the
Yeah, right.
yeah.
2%.
Yeah. So then the second scenario where we're in the downtown TIF district, but we're not subject to the credit enhancement agreement, then you've got $83,000 that is lost in the tax shifts, and you've got a net benefit of $65,000 to the town. Similarly, a very small amount of that is subject to the, is actually TIF revenue and has to be used for economic development projects, and the rest is general.
So when we, sorry, these may be really elementary questions, but when we say a tax shift, what's it shift from where to where?
So it is a tax shift from the town. So I guess when you lose the revenue from a new tax dollar, from new tax dollars, you are losing revenue sharing and education aid and adding county taxes. It's a shift of responsibility to Scarborough financially for its own purposes. And it makes that revenue that's available in those subsidies available to other municipalities. To the extent that the town didn't experience that.
The other way to characterize that red block is those are dollars lost to us. In the case of general purpose aid and also revenue sharing, those dollars are redistributed to other communities under the formula. In the case of county tax, we're paying more county tax than we would have to otherwise, essentially.
Yeah, so other communities otherwise would have to pay a little bit more, but.
So it goes to the community, but it doesn't go to the municipality. It goes to the Downs, which is in the community. No?
No. No, these are actual dollars lost to us by virtue of the fact that we're not sheltering them.
Okay.
I'm gonna stay with Don's line. It does sound kind of simple, and I think I've almost grasped it. So I'm gonna try to put it simply for me, see if I'm right. So the higher that as we hire in value, we get less revenue sharing from the state. So that's lost dollars.
Right.
The higher we're valued, the less dollars for education we get from the state. So the dollars we're getting for this new development is getting lost because we're backfeeding these losses because of the higher value. Does that sound, I know it's kind of simple.
No, that's
That's
right.
right.
That
Right,
shift
that's
is,
right.
it's important. Right, so,
Yeah.
Thank you.
And yeah, great. And just to clarify this too, so it because we're out of minimum receivership, this shift has just started to occur.
Right.
Right. So now the question is, because we're out of minimum receivership, we're getting penalized for every new value we're creating. So should we shelter some of that value? Right. Is that a correct statement?
Yeah, that's right. It's also important to keep top of mind that you're always coming out ahead. You just are losing some percentage of the new value.
Yes,
right.
Because so that can trip people up.
Remember back to the dollar sign slide. So essentially 58% of every new tax dollar paid, we're not taking advantage of.
Can't spend it because it's going to the state for the county.
That's right. That's where the shift is. It's going to, that money that would otherwise be here
For us.
is, yeah, it's available to everybody else. Okay. Yeah, so the second scenario, as I said, is the downtown TIF, but not in the CEA area. And then that last scenario is where the $10 million hypothetical project is not in a TIF district at all. And you can see it's very comparable to the downtown TIF scenario simply because there's only a 3% capture. So you have a slightly more red area, slightly higher red area because you don't have that 3% captured and shielded from the tax, from the state valuation. Okay, so the next set of this bar graph is the scenario, and I'm not making any proposals here, but this is just for purposes of giving you the contrast. This is a scenario where the town would have chosen to capture 100% of the increased assessed value in the entire downtown TIF district. And so it's the same thing where a $10 million project comes in. The first scenario is it's located in the downtown TIF district and is subject to the 40% CEA. And you can see there's no red in that scenario because we are able to retain the entire amount of new tax revenue that's paid, except for the CEA payment. So the CEA payment goes out in this scenario, and then there's $89,000 left, all of which is subject to restrictions on spending. It must be spent on approved project costs under the TIF statute and the town's development program. The second scenario here, right in the middle, is where this project is located in the downtown TIF, but not subject to the CEA. So you've got $148,000 available for TIF approved projects. There's no tax shift losses associated with that amount. And then you've got the not in the TIF district scenario for this $10 million project. That looks the very same as it did in the other prior slide, where you've got a tax shift loss of $86,000. So the next slide just puts these two together so you can see them right next to each other. And I think this is just helpful to compare the two scenarios. Obviously, as I said, the scenario of not in the TIF district is exactly the same. But if you are capturing 100% versus 3% in the TIF district, you can see the impact. It's $48,000 in the CEA area, and it's $83,000 in the rest of the downtown TIF. And the crux of this is, and we'll get to this, is in order to be able to keep all of that revenue, we need to have ways under the statute to spend it that are, priorities for the town. So we'll get to that as well. Any thoughts or questions, comments on these? Yeah.
If I remember correctly, for the current filing we have with the state with the omnibus district, we've only defined two approved. We can always go back and edit it and amend it and do it, but we can add to that list of projects. But can you remind me what the list of projects is right now? It's SEDCO and traffic?
Yeah,
that right?
economic development programs, which
Yeah.
includes SEDCO, and then there's some traffic related improvements related to the TIF district. So Karen, I don't know if you want to.
That's fair.
Pretty
Is
much
that right?
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, so our list of things that we applied for is 2.
Yes.
But our list could be 8 or 10 or what have you. And that's the discussion we're trying to have in a couple
Mhm.
minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of large TIF districts where there's a significant amount of capture, in this case, there's only 3%, so 2 projects was perfectly appropriate. But there are 20, 25 list of projects in the development program. And remember, that is just a menu of options. Every year, the town council will have to decide in its budgeting process, similar to the way you do your general fund budget, what are you going to use the TIF funds on and do a TIF budget.
And we've never done that yet. We haven't touched any of those. So I
No, it's-
forgot what the number is, but there's,
It's less than 60,000 that's been accumulated. to
but
date.
over 3 years, there's been 60,000 that right now we'd spend it on either SEDCO or traffic.
Right.
Yeah.
So just in theory, right, just trying to put this together practically for budget, this year for budget, we funded SEDCO out of the general fund for the most part. But in theory, in the future, if we found out what that percentage was, that was the right percentage, we could fully fund SEDCO out of these excess TIF revenues that would be sheltered. So it would be that wouldn't go to the taxpayer. The taxpayer wouldn't have to pay whatever the 0.001 penny it is for SEDCO, because it would be essentially, that's not a real number, by the way. I don't know what the number is, but just saying it's a small amount. But again, we could use those funds in the future to fully fund SEDCO, assuming those funds were coming in at that level where we could dedicate that money to funding those types of operating things in the budget.
That's right. Yeah. Yep, you're getting ahead of us, but yes.
This question might be a little bit off track here, but I'm trying to visualize the downtown TIF and when we say the Downs area, that's the Crossroads Planning District, the same thing? Is that the same thing?
It happens
CPD?
to be, there's maybe 50 acres is different.
Okay.
But essentially, yes.
And that goes basically along Route 1 and then
If you look at
There we
the,
go. Thanks.
yeah, so it's the big purple blob that kind of moves north to south on the plan as shown.
Yeah.
That's essentially depicting the Downs property, the 500 acres.
Yep.
And then we've connected it along the Route 1 corridor and some distance back from that. And then Oak Hill proper, if you will, including this campus that we sit on. And then extending on the other side of the Oak Hill intersection down to, I think it's the Main Men campus, Campus Drive.
Not quite,
Not
but
quite?
close, yeah.
So when we're talking about shifting, could you just go back a minute, the map, if we could, we're talking about taking monies and trying to apply them to the rest of the downtown TIF, to that sort of horizontal shaped part of the map.
Well, we'll get into that. I mean, the statute spells out what you can use TIF revenues for. The easiest lift will be expenditures within the district that are qualified. But there are circumstances that you can spend those monies for costs and things outside of the district if there's a relationship. And that's some of the work we've done to help illustrate where we think some opportunity is.
You said we're gonna get more of that a little later.
Yeah.
Right now, right now.
We're ready.
So wait a
Shall we
second,
see?
do we have, no.
Well, so,
Yeah. right?
so Tom just sort of got us started here, but there are 4 categories. I usually only talk about 3, but in Scarborough, we get to talk about 4. 4 categories about the ways in which TIF revenues can be spent under the TIF statute. TIF statute breaks it into these components. The first tier is projects that are inside of the district. They're called project costs, which is why you see that language. Project costs that are located inside the TIF district are much more easily qualified under the statute. So the credit enhancement agreement is an example of that. That is funding or helping to finance improvements inside the district that are related to economic development. The tier 2 projects don't necessarily have to be located in the district. They need to be directly related to or made necessary by the TIF district development. So we can talk a little bit more about, as we get into Karen's part of the presentation, what projects fit into that category. And then tier 3 is somewhat of a catch-all. There are, I think now 10 different subcategories of things that this legislature has decided can be funded anywhere in the town through any TIF district, because they think that that is economic development, important enough economic development linked projects. So the SEDCO piece falls under that, economic development, departmental cost, that kind of thing. And there's various other things that we'll get into a little bit later. Tier 4 is not very commonly used, but it is costs of facilities or buildings that are leased by the town and are located in a downtown TIF district. And so we can talk a little bit more about that specifically here as well. Yeah.
So does that mean the cost of building the facility or the cost of the lease?
Yeah, I think we need to flesh it out a little bit. I'll be totally frank with everybody. I have never seen it used in my 16 years of practicing TIF law. I don't know of why it came to be. It must have been used somewhere. So I expect to have continue conversations, because a few years ago, we did start conversations with DCD about the use of this project in this particular district, just thinking in the future. And so we'll talk about that. The language of the statute is costs of buildings. Let me find it so that we can.
As she's finding that, we purposely put in place a downtown TIF district, because that's the only one allowed under state law where tier 4 applies. And so we really wanted to preserve this option. As Shauna said, I think we need to do a lot more work with DCD before we commit to something, but I think there's tremendous opportunity. And I mean, let's face it, what we knew is the Downs was on its way. We had a good sense of some big capital needs the town had. And the thought was this might be an option for us to be able to finance that going forward, at least during the period of the TIF.
Shauna, just to be clear, like, once these things would be approved, they're approved. So that's kind of your job to put the application together. So we would know well in advance before we spent money on these if they were approved, right? Because once we set the application and it makes it on the list, we're good to go in the future. Whether we fund it or not is a different question.
Yes.
Right, but we wouldn't be rolling the dice on things because they would have to approve it and add it to our
We
application.
would not commit to a lease with an expectation.
Yeah, and I'm not even talking
Lease.
about a lease, really. I'm just talking about even tier 3.
Or any of them, correct.
Yes, right.
That's right.
But that in particular, we would not commit to a lease without a clear understanding of our ability to use TIF revenues to help support it.
So
You gotta remember,
I'm
part of the
sorry.
reason,
Yeah.
yeah, part of the reason they would allow this exception, if you will, is because it's still going to be a privately owned structure, right? We're just, so it's a business and we're leasing it from them. And that's the purpose of the TIF to begin with, is to create new value. And so that's sort of a little bit of an exception. Hey, well, the municipality, you can't build and own your own stuff, but if you're leasing something, you're basically, contributing to economic development.
So can I throw out another hypothetical scenario of would this qualify? So we know for the downtown area, we're thinking about the why can't I think of it right now? The grandstand, and how that could potentially be lease space for the town in the future for some use. So technically in the future, if we decided to go down that path where the town wanted to use that space with an intention of supporting municipal services, this would be covered under tier 4, where we could use the TIF revenues to fund the lease for whoever owns that actual structure.
Yeah, and that gets me back, yes, and that gets me back to your question before about, is it the lease payments or not? And the language actually is costs of constructing or improving facilities or buildings leased by, it's actually state government or municipality that are located in a downtown TIF. So we'll have to work it out, but there's a potential path there.
It sounds, the way you read it, that the renovation costs would be covered, the lease would probably not. But the other thing on that point, I know you didn't want to talk about tier 4, but it kind of clicked with me after our last session, was to, you don't have to file an amendment with DCD for a new CEA, right?
No, because it's an omnibus district and we put language into that original approval that the council can approve credit enhancement agreements.
So the only approval to do something in tier 4, I think, would be local.
If it was a credit enhancement agreement to a business who is building something, then that would qualify, in the already approved omnibus capacity.
Okay.
Otherwise, if we're going to use this particular project cost, because in that scenario, then tier 1 applies. It's improvements in the district. It's a credit enhancement agreement. We've identified that as in the development program already. But I think this particular piece, we have some work to do to kind of make it fit.
And under that scenario, it would require creation of a new credit enhancement agreement with an entity or amendment of an existing one, but we purposely sought and received approval from DCD to, at the local level, approve additional CEAs. Is that correct, Shanna?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're right, that's a local only decision.
Just like, how often could we go back and change the list of projects or things that we would want qualified? Is that something we could do annually? Again, not that we would, but like if in the budget process or something, as we look forward, is that the time to identify projects that we would want to say probably more in our CIP? We may need to go back to the state, add these projects to a list to make sure that we can use those as qualified initiatives under the law.
Yeah, so I would suggest the town try to do an amendment of the district that creates a laundry list that's sort of forward looking. So you can pick in your budget process from a list you've already conceived of. And so my job is usually to try with town staff's help to figure out what could possibly qualify that the town might consider, not promising to do them, so that you'll have the authority when you need it, because it is a process. It's there's a public hearing that's required. Documentation needs to conform with the rules and regulations of the TIF statute, and then the commissioner needs to issue an approval letter. It's not overly onerous, but it is a process that I don't know that you'd really want to do every year.
Yeah, just appreciate when you establish the percentage that you want to shelter for this purpose, we actually create on the books a special TIF revenue fund or program development fund. Like we have so far, that fund is accumulating funds. We've not spent any yet, so there's no kind of requirement. When we do spend them, they can only be spent on the qualified and approved purposes. So That's another way to look at it. I wouldn't want to think that we would do it as frequently as annually, but for instance, if we do something and all of a sudden we slide back to minimal receiver status and our circumstances change, that might be a sort of scenario and a reason for wanting to kind of reconsider what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Sorry, I was just going to suggest after Don's question, let's maybe move on to the next slide. I just want to make sure. I'm going to be a little bit of a chair and
Fine.
move on to the next.
Yeah, I don't want to go back to the Stone Ages, but there's a part, so bear with me just a minute. So I kind of get the whole minimum receiver, factor there. But there's a part of this that is puzzling to me because it does seem that we're, whether these funds are, sheltered or go to a, downtown district or a TIF district, it seems the benefit to the TIF in my mind is that it just makes it easier for the municipality to use those funds more freely. Is that a fair statement? Rather than, otherwise you could still do the same thing, but you'd be going for other sources of funds, right? You wouldn't be coming directly, wouldn't be taking the cut out of the taxes before it goes to the town.
Well, I think there's two differences. One, you're losing 58 cents on every new dollar. That's the biggest reason. And I would actually say it's the inverse. This limits what we could do with the money. And that's one of the arguments that the prior council put forward is that we don't want to restrict ourselves. Let's flow it to the general fund. Let's decide as a council and as a community how we want to spend these. We don't want to be bound by the statutory limitations.
I see. So, and the 15% is the limit, that's the limitation? What's the, you're talking about the 15% shift?
57.
58 cents.
Pardon?
58 cents on every new
58
dollar.
cents, right, 58 cents.
That's the most compelling reason in my mind.
But just to clarify, in that situation, when the council made that decision, we weren't getting the 58 cents to the
Fair enough.
dollar.
That's right.
Yep, different scenario.
So that's maybe why back then it was.
And as Council Chair Johnson raised, that was in the middle of the CA discussion, and that was all consuming. And frankly, the council at the time kind of needed to set up the district and its basic parameters, didn't have the time and attention to really kind of had this discussion. And it wasn't really as valuable as it is today, frankly. So here we are 3 years in and we're having it.
So I just want to make one final point. So when I went back and read some other documents, some policy documents about TIFs and CEAs from Sun Foundation, I'll give the quote to you, but I'll circulate the document. But it seemed like, and stepping out of Maine for a moment, it just seemed like the original purpose of a lot of the TIFs was to address blighted areas in large urban centers. That seemed to be, and we're talking about bigger city situations there. So that just, we don't really have that here. I mean, we're not really, dealing with remediation, environmental remediation or whatever. We're not dealing with, issues like that. So it does seem that we have a different, a better set of circumstances than dealing with a major metro or some other things that maybe TIFs were intended for originally.
There, in the main statute, there is language regarding blighted areas, environmental improvement projects, kind of that have come about because of economic development projects. So those themes are there. It's more flexible, as you said. I mean, the requirement, as opposed to requiring a property to be blighted to be in a TIF district, there needs to be a certain percentage suitable for commercial development because it's a broader goal in the main statute than some of the original inceptions. I mean, the state statutes across the country are quite varied. So I don't know what the status of them all is now. It occurred to me, one of the other comments you had made reminded me of a criticism I have read about TIF districts where the sort of process around expenditure of TIF revenues is not robust enough, and as compared to the rest of the expenditures that the municipality has to make. And that I don't have a concern about in Scarborough in particular, but anywhere, because you've got appropriation requirements legally, whether it's TIF revenue or general fund revenue. And I do think it's important to kind of have a clear process, as I know, the town of Scarborough would, about, what are we spending? Are we spending TIF revenue for this project? Are we spending general fund revenue? And tracking that just as you would any other revenue.
We do have
Thanks.
to, we do have to get through a little bit here. So
I have.
But I called chair like 5 questions ago. Go ahead, John.
It's kind of a random question.
Oh,
but
great, good.
kind of well, it was just something worth saying that was just making.
Don's on deck. Well, this
Is, and again, maybe we don't need to answer it and put it in the parking lot, but, down the road, assuming we do this and assuming we want to make a big expenditure based on these TIF funds, if it's over $400,000, does it need to go to referendum, or do we have the authority based on the TIF law that we as a council or whomever can authorize those funds for that use without having to go to the voters?
Yeah, I don't think there would be a distinction between TIF revenue and general fund revenue when it comes to that charter requirement.
Okay.
As the charter currently is written, it would, anything above 400,000 in appropriation, regardless of source.
Okay.
Funds, requires voter approval. The Charter Commission does have recommendations around that issue, and this council, I hope, will take it up over the course of the next 6 or 8 months.
Okay, go.
Okay. These are unauthorized projects under the statute, these categories. And I just highlight it because I think some of the things that have been discussed around the potential town lease come up here. So you can see there's some tensions in the statute we need to sort through to really make sure we've got a path for whatever project might be created here. But the idea here is that the legislature didn't want TIF revenues to be available for general governmental. It needed to have a connection to economic development. Okay, the last slide for me is just funding project costs. And I think we've alluded to this to some extent. You can set aside TIF revenues over time like a reserve fund, so that you're not required to expend them fully each year. And that creates some opportunities. You may be able to borrow less if you want to use the TIF fund to reserve some funds. You can also fund TIF projects with municipal bonds and then have the debt service paid with TIF revenues. And I'm going backwards in the list here, but credit enhancement agreements are on this list simply because sometimes a private entity can undertake a project that the town cares about. And you do that through a credit enhancement agreement to allow them the use of some TIF revenues for that. Yeah.
So if I understand this correctly, we could use TIF funds to reduce our debt by paying off municipal bonds. Is that right?
If the project that the bonds financed qualified under the statute, yes. Yeah. You got it. Okay, well, so I'm not going anywhere, but I'm going to turn the next set of slides that are directly following here. Karen, it comes right after. Yep. And Karen's going to now talk about these tiers as applied to the Scarborough budget.
This is the applied theory piece of this. So, and I want you guys to think about the TIF district, that you have 2 levers, if you will, and Sean has already talked about them. One lever is what percentage you're going to capture, how much of the value. The other lever is what projects you have are you going to put into your pocket of things that you can spend money on. So both of those things work together in order to do your different projects. So I'm going to relate back to the tiers that Shauna talked about. And quickly, the tier 1 types of costs, capital expenses. For instance, if we were putting in the sewer line and we wanted to charge that to the TIF district, we can. That's essentially what we're doing in the Higas Parkway TIF. We can do professional services costs, like if we had some costs necessary to increase the TIF or do anything that we needed some professional services for that were directly related to the TIF, we could do that. We can also use some staff costs. For instance, the cost that Nick spends and the cost that of staffing for Ruth as they develop and administer the TIF. That can actually get billed to the TIF as well. There's some, other types of things, but in typically that's the types of costs that we're looking at. We don't have any relocation costs at this point, so we're pretty good on those costs inside the TIF district.
And just to be clear, this language underneath each of the tiers comes directly from statute. So this is
Correct.
not staff. We're just kind of drilling down a bit further so you get a flavor of what's qualified under each tier.
Right. So tier 2, these are the facilities due to improvements or improvements or activities within the district, costs of public safety improvements related to the establishment of the district. Like we said, utilities, street amenities, public safety improvements, those types of things can go under there and they can take place. They have to be directly related to the project. Tier 3 is that really flexible piece, and it's the piece that the state authorizes in order to encourage towns to invest in economic development. And economic development is not necessarily always directly within the district itself. And so those are your economic development programs. You can have some environmental improvements. If you had an arts district, you can do revolving loan funds and some more traditional economic development programs. But you can also look at childcare and adult care, staffing, training, certification. You can look at recreational trails that they have to be related to economic development. And for us, if you took the Eastern Trail, that's definitely related to economic development. We talk about that all the time when we're dealing with the new business. And then quickly, there's some other programs in there, but Tier 4 is what Shauna has spent some time with in terms of trying to understand what that piece is.
So real quick, just a clarifying question. I think this is important to realize this is within the districts, right? So one of my immediate concerns is, what about Oak Hill a lot of times? But Oak Hill qualifies just as much as the Downs does for a lot of these things,
Absolutely.
right? And I think that's important for all of us to recognize. It's in that
Absolutely.
huge district. It doesn't matter where the revenue is coming from.
Right.
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 So,
And that includes, you remember, Route 1 and traffic improvements there. So there's a lot of things that can be approved there. And so what I did is I just went back through the FY22 budget and I said, all right, let me pull some things. This is probably in no way everything that could get billed, but these are the sort of obvious pieces. Again, we're talking about some town staff salaries that go with administering the district, some legal costs, those types of things. There are some project costs. We're calling this is the outside but directly related to the district. And those two projects there, I would say, come under our approved list of items that are traffic related improvements. You're looking at traffic controls along Route 1. So then you've got project costs unrelated to the district, but anywhere in town. So SEDCO operating expenses, other staff involved in economic development time. We can take 5%, 10% of Tom's time because he absolutely sits down to meet with potential clients and all of that. Jay does as well. Eastern Trail improvements, the Highland Avenue bike ped study that is in the CIP. And then there's the business license module. It's in the CIP. It's not funded yet. Some portion of the daycare. We wouldn't be able to bill costs that are being reimbursed, but we could bill potentially some of the cost of the hub itself, the building. And then we also talk about a portion of the debt service on that public safety building. Has to be related to the impact, the portion that might be related to the Downs. But I think we can easily begin to look at that population, employment, all of that that's associated with the Downs. And then again, we don't have any items identified in Tier 4 yet in terms of the fiscal year 2022.
So just looking forward to some big capital investments we have to make, like the library expansion and the consolidated schools. Would those qualify as projects where we could use some of the TIF funds, or at least using the portion of the debt service, or using it to pay some of the bonds that we would want to take out?
So
Library expansion, I think of that as an economic development opportunity based on what I've seen, where I know Nancy's thinking about how you use some of that space as a place for private entities to come and do business and do some commerce.
I'm going to say, I think there's potential. Shauna always wants us to be very careful about this. So, particularly if the library was leasing space in the Downs, we might be able to make a case for that. And I think, a couple of other things that we've talked about, as long as we're doing it in the concepts of leasing the structure and building and leasing the structure.
I would just offer that to the extent you're building a facility and some portion of it is going to be dedicated for use by local businesses, I would be comfortable trying to make a prorated argument there. I've never seen libraries just sort of as a general premise go through. I think that would probably not work. And schools don't qualify as a general rule. Job training programs can qualify. So to the extent there's some connection to jobs created or retained in the town of Scarborough with a job training program, that would work.
Shauna, could you tell me why a portion of the debt service from the public safety building may qualify and a portion of the debt from a new consolidated school may not qualify?
The public safety facilities are called out in the TIF statute.
Okay.
And so and actually in a couple different ways. One of the ways is new as of just a couple of years ago in the statute. So they're really trying to allow for municipalities to, to the extent we can make the case that it's related to economic development, the need for that facility was related to the business development. And to some extent, I think we can always make that argument. We'll have
Not all of it, but I
a
think some portion, some percentage of.
Right. Okay, so then I took those costs that we just looked at. Again, I'm focused really on fiscal year 2022. And I said, all right, well, I could find within the budget, project expenses within the current, that's in the current development program, traffic, economic development, those two categories. There's about $766,000 that I could identify. Part of that was again, the traffic light signalization improvements. So there's that. Now those are in the actual operating budget. And then there was an additional $600,000 that was in the 5-year CIP. So, and I separated out, it was in the 5-year CIP, but also in the operating budget. I just used the operating budget. And so there's several programs that are in that category as well. Then there were some project expenses that we have. They're not really in the current development program, but we probably could apply some funds to it. That really was the cost of the hub, that $200,000 there. Again, there's an offset of fees that pay for the salaries and all of that. But anything that's not paid for, we could apply some of that as well. And I allocated about $200,000. Then we have some additional project expenses, not included in the current development program, but we're in the 5-year CIP. And that was another $300,000 or so. And then we took 15% of the debt service for the public safety building and came in at $200,000 on that. So there's a pool of different expenses that were in fiscal year 2022 or in our current 5-year CIP. And then we're going to move to Nick, who's going to talk a little bit about what the numbers
I
are.
think John had a question.
Oh, sorry, John.
Can
He's trying to talk so fast.
Can
It's
you
over
go
with.
back one more slide, Paul? I just, so this, yes, this one. So when you were talking, I think maybe actually one more where she listed out. Okay. So no, you were there. That was it. Yeah. So I think of this as like a menu of things that we
Yes.
decide are worth saving for, right? We're not ready to appropriate funds for them, but it's worth, instead of paying a 60% tax on new money coming in, we put that in the bank and at some future date, we could spend money on these. We don't have to spend money on those things. And then when you go to the next slide, the budget, this is an example of, well, had we built that savings account, we could have paid for these things with those funds.
2 point whatever it is, 2.2 million, right? That is.
Yeah, just keep in mind, it's not as if we've lost any time. We don't have funds to support that level of expenditure. I would say that I think this conversation is very appropriate now because by the same token, we've not come accustomed to having significant new money flowing to the general fund. So to the extent that we want to kind of shift that and decided to put it into shelter through the TIF, it's not sufficient to the point that it's going to be painful to make that switch. If we wait longer and this thing really starts to pick up steam and produce value and therefore tax revenue, when you do that, decide it's going to hurt because you're accustomed, it's built into our general fund budget to support our operations. So this is really timely to have this conversation in the next year or so.
And we really have a little bit more of a lag 'cause it's a 3-year average, right? So we're still firmly in the beginning process of all of this, right?
And remember, I think our goal was to only take things that were already in the budget and being paid for by the general fund, where you didn't add anything new. We're not suggesting any new programs. We're just saying, these are the things that are related to economic development and the state intended this program to help you fund.
I mean, as a result of that being the dynamic, it actually wouldn't hurt you very much in a circumstance where you decide to capture in 1 year, and because you're really going to just be paying for something out of TIF revenue that you would have paid for out of the general fund. I mean, it depends upon, sort of the timing of different expenditures.
So the simplest one, the lowest hanging fruit is things in our operating budget. We are spending tax dollars today, 100%, 100% of that dollar is going to support what we've agreed is a important priority. If the difference is if you use TIF dollars, the shelter benefit really, exponentially helps, that equation, obviously.
Right. Think of it as you may have spent $50,000, but because of the tax shift, you're going to get 57%, 58% of that value back in your revenue sharing funds. So you're not shifting that cost anywhere. You're still paying for it. What you're getting is a better distribution of funds. So you're getting more money in your other 3 funds that Sean has talked about.
With the exception of paying less funds to the county. It's just a little.
Yeah, that's true.
slightly.
Because the county doesn't reimburse us, but
Right.
revenue sharing and general purpose aid comes afterwards, so to
Right.
speak. Council Johnson, did you have a question?
No, I'm gonna go watch the finance committee meeting. It's the proper,
Similar to this.
because I'm a little confused. I understand the sheltering of the value, okay, because that was the first 3 or 4 slides in here. I don't understand the benefit of sheltering the tax dollars. I'm losing it somewhere, so help me.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking the question. So if you capture the value, then the resulting TIF revenues, sometimes people consider that to be captured TIF revenue, just because it relates to the captured value.
Right.
We're not talking about a different concept. It's the same concept. It's more appropriate to say we're capturing the value. And then there's TIF revenues associated with captured value.
Okay, so if the tax shift really is driven by the value and not the revenue, what is the benefit to be paying for certain items out of a separate account and not the general fund?
It is in fact related to the fact you've captured the value. That's what gives you the ability and the restriction of using those TIF revenues on only TIF projects. So in order to get the benefit we've been talking about of the capture, then you have to use the TIF revenues on certain projects. So that's the exercise Karen's been going through. What are we already using general fund revenues on that instead we could use TIF revenues on, and then the TIF revenues will relate to captured value that then will result in this tax shift saving.
Okay,
And if you capture the value, you must then create a separate account for the taxes on that value. So the capturing the value can't be done without then differentiating the taxes that are collected on that new value. So you can't just capture and freeze it. So what we're trying to do is say Scarborough's worth $5 billion. Let's have the downtown area build up, but we'd still be able to say to the state that Scarborough's still only worth $5 billion.
Exactly.
Right? It's actually worth $6 billion. But as far as the state's concerned, we're only 5 billion now. So then our proportion of all those taxes is based off 5 billion instead of 6 billion. So that's, I mean, that's the, that's the bottom line to it. And then that's how our revenue sharing is based off what our valuation is compared to everybody else. And the assistant we're getting from education is based off that as well. So we're just trying
Lower
to,
5 million is what it's based on.
what's that?
It's based on the lower 5 million in that,
Yeah, right.
5 billion in that.
5 billion, right. So we're just trying to keep that 5 billion as close to 5 billion as possible, even if we go to 7 billion.
The one thing I'm having a hard time getting my head around is, among many other things, but one thing in particular is that I'm struggling with what time frame are we talking about? Does this mean forever after? Does it mean for just this year we're getting benefits, or for a period of 30 years under a CEA? I'm having a really hard time with that.
Shauna, can I try to answer it just to see if we understand it? I think we're talking about for about 27 more years, because that's the length of the TIF district, because 3 years have gone by. And we're also assuming that we do not dip below minimum receivership as well. So if we dip back into minimum receivership, this exercise is slightly less fruitful, as in a lot less fruitful. But if we stayed above minimum receivership, this is about a 27-year exercise.
So that's how you would frame it, given those conditions.
Correct,
those
right. But if we go
assumptions.
back to minimum receivership, this whole tax shift burden, the tax shift benefit, excuse me, isn't nearly as sexy as it is right now. And 3 years ago, that's exactly where we are. There was no differentiation between the TIF district and the rest of town. There wasn't any quote benefit to sheltering, not nearly as much benefit, I should say. So, was that good?
Yeah,
All right.
I don't know, did it answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I have other questions. Put them in the parking lot for now.
But is it?
He's the parking lot attendant.
He's in the parking lot. I meant to say one.
Another parking lot, no. So just thinking about that though, like, how flexible is it for us to be able to, like, say we wanted to go to like sheltering 20% instead of the 3% we have today, but then the dynamic changes, the situation changes back to what it was. Do we have the flexibility to quickly shift back, or like how long does it take to like make those changes if we wanted to say, for the next 5 years, we're hoping to be at 20%, but if things change, can we quickly change it back to 3% or a lower percentage?
Yes, so you can amend anytime, like we were saying before, similar to adding new projects. You can do an amendment process, change the percentage of captured value, and it can be anything from 1 to 100. There is a feature, and we can talk more about the possibility of using this. I think the city of Portland and the city of Bangor both use this to some extent, where the city council, in those circumstances, there's a feature of the statute that allows them to drop the percentage of capture without going through an amendment for a particular budget year and send a notice to DECD that they've done that. So we could consider a process like that, and it just allows you more flexibility if you're really on top of this on an annual basis. Like, well, we need a little more for the general fund. We don't have a lot of priorities this year. You have to be cognizant of the fact, though, that once let's say you're at 50, and this 1 year you say, we're going to just go to 20, we have a budget issue. The next year, it's going to be really hard to go back to 50 because your general fund will have been expecting that. So that's the caution I have around that process, but it has been used elsewhere. I have been told that it has eroded the ability of those cities to use the capture again.
Right. But it's the same process. We would go to DCD, and in this case, initially look to raise the percentage. We would go back to them and look to reduce the percentage.
Yeah.
All right, Nick, you got 10 minutes?
Sure.
All right.
He's got the good stuff.
Well, it's all been good, but these are some concrete numbers which might give it an example of, had fiscal year 22, had the capture rate been different in the downtown district. These are some of the actual numbers. The first slide we don't have to go back to necessarily. This is the second. I just showed out the different categories of captured versus not captured, but this slide here, which you already have up, hits home the point of the tax shift loss versus available to the town at each captured percentage in the downtown.
there's a slide before this, right?
That's correct. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think. you
But
just
I was trying
yeah,
to-
you could, if you want to just skip to that one, you could, right?
That's
It's
what I
all-
am-
All the
okay,
same data is
Yeah,
on
I'm gonna
it.
skip to that one then.
Yeah.
Just in the interest of time. And we can always go back to the other one if you have questions, because it kind of shows where these numbers came from.
Yeah.
This is what tells the story, this page here. The two lines in green on the top two sections, A and B, is what's going to be the net benefit to the town. But how do we get there? So at the actual fiscal year 22, 3%, that whole column is what actually happened in the downtown district at the 1502 tax rate. 34,000 roughly went to the downtown TIF development fund. And then the 40% of capture in the Downs district of their increased value is the same across all scenarios. That does not change it. If you go down to the tax revenue to general fund from the increased assessed value, when it's not captured, so the part not in the Downs, it's 97%. The part in the Downs, it's not 43, but the opposite of that. 57, yeah.
Coincidentally,
Yeah.
57.
So that's what accounts for that number at the 3%. Then you see that negative 405. That's what that whole 57 to 58 cents on the dollar that we're saying we lose or have to, end up not receiving from the state or have to pay back to the county as a result of not sheltering the value. And the amount below is the 42 cents on the dollar that we do get to keep and spend. So you see, the more we shelter at each percentage, 3 versus 10 through 100. If you go all the way up to 100, that kind of mirrors Shauna's earlier slides of the different bar graphs where it was all green, meaning net benefit to the town. We didn't lose any in that shift equation. We got the full dollar for every dollar of increased value to spend. The only difference is it had to be on the approved cost. When you don't shelter it, you do get the 42 cents on the dollar for general fund, but you're losing, in this instance, 400,000 to that every 57 cents on the dollar. I was trying to gloss over quickly, so I don't know if it made sense, but people say that the red line there is what we're trying to get across, that money that could have been used by the town for an approved TIF purpose was just lost to other communities or paying in county taxes.
So Nick, just to kind of bring this back, because we had a $10 million project example.
Yes.
This is essentially a $50 million project example. Because the increased assessed value in the Downs is about $50 million.
The increase in the whole district is 76 million.
$76 million.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking at the not captured.
Yeah.
Sorry. So this is essentially Shauna's bar graph that had the 10 million. This is there was $70 million worth of value created last year in the Downs.
In the total life of the district.
In the total life of the district.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right. That's true. Because every year it's, yeah. So that's just essentially multiplying all Shauna's numbers by 7.
And another point that I've heard people, including Tom, if he wants to embellish, make, we're at the start of this project really ramping up. So at the 3%, we wouldn't have seen much anyway, but even if it was 100%, the projects have just started ramping up. The Downs and beyond, the value is about to double, triple. So the benefits of sheltering will be far greater. Instead of losing 400,000, you might lose $1 million,
So the red line really translates into dollars, what the loss to the town is. Loss by way of less subsidy for education support and revenue sharing and more money we're paying for county operations. I guess you could argue that 405, is added to the tax rate and all of us taxpayers are paying that bill. And the question,
especially if you're rationalizing it with the examples Karen gave, things that were already funded. So, those could have been funded with that 400,000 had it been 100% capture because they're in the TIF district allowable costs, if that laundry list increases of allowable costs.
Yeah, I do think that's another really important benefit of this graph is thinking about what the costs are of Karen's approved list or potential approved list and what is available there and recognizing it's going to grow.
Yeah, and there's nothing magical about 3, 10, 20, 50, 100. We did it just for illustrative purposes. It can be, as Shauna said, anything from 1 to 100. So that's the basic point we want to leave you with. And we appreciate there's probably still more questions is that, there's a way to really maximize and be strategic about how we operate within this TIF district in particular, because it really is the economic engine and will be for the next, couple of decades, presumably. There'll be other, certainly development townwide, but this 1,000 acres is likely to be where most of it occurs.
Well, it could be a tax stabilization engine. We're just not using it to its full potential. necessarily, Right.
Just a point of clarification about, say you were to utilize the example of 100% capture in the area with the downs, you can't, so 40% would go to them, 60% to the town. If there's not part of a CEA in another part, 100% to the town TIF district fund. There are other CEAs in the downtown TIF that are barely started and will start to be on the books in the coming year. The Jocelyn Place, the Avesta Route 1. So if that's 100% capture, 75 to them, 25% to the TIF downtown district. At the different percentages of 10, 20, there's more administrative figuring out who gets paid first, but the prior obligations need to be paid out first to the CEAs.
And to that point, and I'm not going to make, but to that point, when you do look at if we capture 100% of the increased assessed value in a TIF district, you even with a 40% CEA, or in the Jocelyn Place's case, 75% CEA, there's actually still more money going to the bottom line as long as it's located in the TIF district than if the same exact project was going on outside the TIF district.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
And that's what this graph illustrates here. I'm not suggesting we're going to run around giving free money away. Did you hear that? I'm not suggesting. But what I am saying, is that what that does is it actually, it gives you that flexibility. The bottom line actually, even minus the 40%, is still better as if it was outside the TIF district. John, I'm sorry, had your hands up.
Yeah, no, that's actually a similar point that I was trying to make. Can you go back to the red line?
Yep.
Nick, I'll put you on the spot. I think I know close enough to the answer. Do you know what we refunded to the downs this year for the CEA?
Yeah, just give me a moment. Let's see. It hasn't happened yet, but $400,000.
Okay, so if we'd have captured 100% this year, we would have paid for the down CEA.
Interesting.
And it's right up there, actually,
Yeah.
407. Sorry, I looked on.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me
Yeah.
see.
And it's the same across every
400,000.
scenario. That does not change. What changes is how much of the rest of it we get to keep.
Right. And Paul, that's why when you look at TIFs in other communities, a lot of times the communities are 50% right off the bat because they know that they're going to make it back. So it's like a break even point for them. And that's why they were, when we were comparing us when we were a minimum receiver, we just couldn't do that because we didn't
have the
benefit from tax
We didn't
shield.
have that shelter benefit. The other thing to keep in mind, the CEA obligations we have with the Downs, with Jocelyn Place, with Avesta and others, those are contractual obligations. They are going to get paid unless we renegotiate those deals. So this conversation is around everything but that. And this is totally unilateral within your control, subject to statute limitations, the limitations of the statute. So I just want to be clear that CEAs are not part of this conversation. Those have already been decided on. We will pay them per the terms of that. This is what do we do with the balance and how do we maximize our benefit?
Another administrative point, maybe Shauna can speak to the timing, but for assessing purposes, having things happen before April 1st of a given year is usually the easiest way for me to administer something without having to jump through hoops or answer questions. So if you're able to figure out whether or not you want to increase the percentage of capture, having it be in the next few months before April 1st would be advisable, I would think. But
Yeah, it's actually required that it occur before the end of February.
Okay.
That then we can submit to the state on March 1st, according to their deadline.
So we just put that out there to say, not to suggest we need to rush to do something. We need to kind of all go along at a pace that makes sense to all of you. But if we want to take advantage as soon as next year, we're looking at kind of a February timeframe, which, may be doable depending on your appetite.
All right, with that, I think we could all use a 10-minute break. So all four of you, thank you so much. I believe we followed at least 40% of that. So thank you for your time.
Success.
Very informative. Yes, it was great. Thanks, everybody.
Both had a little speed talk.
I know, we're like,
And it's getting
Good evening, everybody. This is the Wednesday, October 6, 2021 regular town council meeting for Scarborough, Maine. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 3, Tracy, you want to take a roll call?
Here.
Here.
Council Anderson.
Here.
Council Hamel.
Here.
Council Katarina. Here. And Chairman Johnson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item number 4 is general public comments. Is there anybody that would like to speak to anything that's not on the agenda tonight? Anybody? Anybody on Zoom? No? With that, I'll close general public comments. Item number 5 is approval of the September 15th, 2021 minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No? Tracy?
G.
Yes.
Council Johnson.
Yes.
Council Anderson.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Council Katarina.
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Item number 6 is adjustments to the agenda. I don't believe anybody will be offering any. Item number 7 are treasurer warrants. I've already signed them. Item number 8 is the town manager's report. Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of points to raise to your attention and the public's. I guess the first area, the theme will be kind of an HR, human resources update. I can say, across all departments, we are really challenged. We've got an extremely hard time, and we're not alone. I think every sector in this economy is really faced with challenges hiring people, and we're really perplexed. We've never been in this situation before. It runs the gamut. Our childcare services, we typically rely on almost exclusively part-timers to do a lot of that work. We simply can't hire. And so consequently, our full-time staff is doing that full-time. And so, we're at wit's end in many respects in terms of how to advertise and how to find staff. At the same time, we do have some fairly high-level vacancies, all for, I'll say, the right and good reasons, people moving on and up to other positions. But in terms of those current vacancies, certainly our fire chief has announced his retirement first of the year. Luckily, he's given me advance notice, and we actually have a job advertisement all ready to go. So we'll be, out ahead of this, and I think in a very good position because of that courtesy he's extended. We're currently interviewing for a senior planner position, which is an absolute key position for us. That position does all the plan reviews in support of the planning board and their work. Luckily, Jay did that for a decade, so he can pivot back to doing that in the interim, but we can't do that for long. We also have an assessing assistant that, to her credit, has taken a new job. Very happy for her, but that's a real critical position. I know Nick is working with HR to fill that void. And then positions in IT is another area that's, we certainly have resources to kind of survive in the near term, but these are key positions that we need to fill. So we're spending more and more time and attention in these areas and still coming up empty in some respects. I'm pleased to report on the police chief front. We have conducted, just to refresh your memory and the public's, we did go through a process in the spring. I really wasn't pleased with the results of that process and decided to go back out, which we did. We produced a similar number kind of in the pool, candidate pool, fairly small, but I would say quite robust in terms of quality. Very pleased this time around. So much so in the first round, we interviewed 6 and they passed on 4 of those names to me. I think that's a good indication of kind of that quality and the caliber of candidates. So I'm very encouraged. And we are making arrangements, or have just today, to do the second round interviews with these 4 candidates. I've reported in the past that we really want to kind of stay as true and consistent to the first process because we really like that in many respects. There's one change. Chairman Johnson was a participant in the second round of interviews, isn't able to with his work schedule. And so Councilor Clucci is going to assist us in this next piece. So we'll hold those interviews over the next 2 weeks or so. And perhaps as soon as the next meeting, I'll certainly give you an update. And again, I'm encouraged with what I see in front of me and anxious to meet them in person and kind of put them through the process, if you will. I also want to provide the council and the public an update on the Fairfield Inn, just for your, so you can recall, that facility has been used kind of dual purpose for the last 9 months or so. That's for a temporary emergency homeless shelter and also a quarantine and isolation center. And perhaps members of the public and certainly the council, I think, have observed kind of the, some of the activity in that general area of town. Some of it, I think, certainly is related to the operation there. I have been working with Maine Housing. As of the end of September, they have ceased the temporary homeless shelter at that location, though they do intend to run a quarantine and isolation center through November this year. The facility will not be open to the public. It will simply be used, and just a portion of it will be used, but that need still exists as this pandemic persists in our society. Council Chair and Vice Chair have asked me to kind of track our public safety activity just so we can get a sense of what sort of demands are being put on us, and we'll do that, and I'll report out consistently in that regard. Just a couple of housekeeping things, tax related reminder, first half taxes are due October 15th. That's fairly typical every year, just a reminder. Also, for those that want to make applications for the Senior Property Tax Assistance Program, that also has a deadline of October 15th. So I see the assessor nodding his head. If you're not aware of that program, certainly town staff can make you aware of it and strongly encourage anyone who qualifies, they should be part of that. And lastly, again, under the heading of housekeeping, just looking out, I guess for the remainder of October, there will be a special meeting a week from tonight on October 13th. That will be a workshop that has two components. The first will be to meet with I'll say the development team that's interested in converting the Candlewood Suites. That's a property at 700 Roundwood off Payne Road, close to the hub, actually. Currently, and for some time, it's been an extended stay facility. They'd like to convert it to apartments, multifamily apartments, essentially. That does require a contract zone, and so this would be kind of an introduction to the development team and their concept in that regard. That's the first half. The second half will be really the council working through a process to scope out and further identify need for kind of outside consulting support. In large part, it's due to some upcoming discussions with the Crossroads folks, part of the Downs project. But as evidenced by the conversation earlier just this evening, I think there's also some larger, kind of longer range financial and capital planning needs that we could benefit from. So I know Councilor Anderson has been tasked with kind of fleshing out what that scope of work and need might be. And I think it's time that we get the full council to kind of weigh into that conversation so we can be a little more specific and actually start to make some selections in that regard. So again, that's we haven't chosen a time yet, Mr. Chairman, but I suspect it's 5:30 or 6 start time.
Yeah, we're gonna go 5:30. Yep.
5:30.
And we'll just roll one workshop right into the other.
Okay.
No meeting afterwards, though. No,
Correct. Just
no
workshop
business
only.
meeting.
And then your next regular meeting on October 20th, we do have a workshop scheduled at 5:30 for the downtown committee to provide its report to the full council and public. We, I believe, have that final report. We're making the final edits as we speak. So I think we'll have that out to all of you by the end of the week, frankly. So you'll have it well in advance. And I know representatives from the committee will be here present and like to present that to you and certainly engage in a conversation. And then the only thing I would flag in the regular meeting on October 20th, and I say this only because it's a bit irregular, we do have scheduled a dangerous building hearing, and that's a council process. Public hearing has been already issued. And this is relative to a property that was the subject of a fire about 18 months ago at 83 Holmes Road. And the facility, the structure has not been occupied since, nor has it been repaired or secured. And so in the first instance, we really want to make sure the property is secured. It may well lead into the town taking the leadership role of actually demolishing the structure and being able to recoup our costs in that regard. So I mentioned that there may also be an executive session that's appropriate as part of that to share some of the personal confidential details that really should not be talked about in public, but I think would be of value to council to appreciate kind of the last 18 months and how staff has worked to support that property owner and why we find ourselves in this situation today. So more to come on that for sure, but I just want to kind of flag that as something coming at you in 2 weeks. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm available for questions.
Thank you, sir. Anybody have questions for Tom? Okay, I see none. With that, we're going to head into item number 9. For item number 9, we have 2 non-action items tonight. Non-action items are pretty simple. They're just updates. We'll get a presentation from 2 different entities, maybe ask them a couple questions, and that will be the extent of it. And for those in the audience and at home, both of these are really, we have already voted, and one of them is complete, so to speak, and it's before the voters, and the other one is an update on our tax commitment. So with that, the first non-action item is a turf track project update from the school department. So Mr. Legage, are you giving this?
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate you having us tonight. Todd Sousa, our Community Service Director, and I'll take you through a few slides, I believe, and just take a few minutes to update you and the community on the turf track project.
Let me get my bookmarks out. Oh, wait, there's no bookmarks.
So just to go through this first kind of overview slide, the turf is about 8 years past its anticipated life expectancy, and the track certainly is looking to have renovations too. These 2 projects certainly go hand in hand, and without these renovations, certainly we faced the facility possibly being closed due to worsening conditions and safety concerns. Certainly, if some of you have been at some recent games, you've seen play stoppages because pieces of the turf flip up and the game has to stop to put them back down in place. The entire community, I think, certainly benefits from this facility, certainly our youth programs and obvious community use of the facility for recreation, but certainly beyond that, I think those that attend events at our community, like a high school game or something, certainly benefit from the bond that's created in bringing the community together. The project will not exceed the referendum request. In 2019, the original request was for 1.6 million. The final number that was not approved was 1.2 million. That deduction was really a result of negotiations with the final 2 vendors during the RFP process. There was nothing ever removed from the project to get to that number. It was really through Mr. Sousa's and I negotiation with the final 2 vendors. Additionally, we had invited Wood and Curran to an initial meeting to discuss this project. As you know, Wood and Curran is our engineering firm that the town regularly uses, and it certainly has the expertise in this area. The new number that's in the referendum includes increase in cost of materials and labor, which Wood and Curran help provide some insight about, and as well as some engineering costs. There has been no money promised to anybody at this point for this project. Once the referendum is approved, then we'll begin to lay out the scope and sequence of that work to be done. Certainly working backwards, our thinking is we'd like the project to be done during the spring season and the facility ready for the fall high school athletic season. I'd certainly also just add the issue of grass versus turf was never a consideration for us. We are a turf facility. The turf affords us greater consistency, durability, and extended use during our main climate. Todd will come and speak a little bit about the other slide. I think we can move on. Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Mike. Yeah, my part is just explain the process that I don't think I did very well during the first process, and thanks to the school and the rest of the town staff, and especially Allison, she's really helped us out with this piece. We've really upped our outreach efforts, working through the communication committee, but both with the town and the BOE. We have a 10-week schedule. We've been going through this. We've met 5 times. Again, using all the resources that we have now available to trying to push this out. Some of you maybe, and we'll in the next slide, it'll show you where it is, but there is a link on the website, has all the FAQ questions, video about the product. So if anybody wants to know anything, that information is there. We also, and it's not on the slide because I believe Mike just scheduled them, but it's on the Facebook page, and I'll announce them so people can see them. But on Friday, October 8th from 5:30 to 6:15, Tuesday, October 12th, 3:30 to 4:45, and Friday, October 15th, 5:30 to 6:15. Mike and Jordan will be leading tours down on the turf. So that is on the website right now as well, but not on the slide deck. So that information is there. So, and what I was referencing, when you click on the homepage, that slide on the left, turf track renovations, that's a hot button. You can click right on that, and it'll bring you to the video. It'll bring you to questions that have been answered that we've received. Some we put together, but some answering the public's questions. And then this QR code that you see is going to be in a lot of media. They're adding that to rosters at games so people can click it and then get information. So we're trying to put that out to the user groups as well. So really trying to push open the marketing piece. And then the next slide, a lot of folks will be familiar with. Allison was so kind to help us put this together. So we've really been, thoughtful in our process of how we've kind of gathered information and then how we're going to put it out to the public so they have opportunities to come back and ask questions prior to the November vote. The most important part of this slide, I think to the general public, are the key points on that bottom left-hand corner. To expand on is just safety and condition and timeline, community use, shelf life, history, and then the cost of doing nothing. And to me, I think that's the most important thing because, as Mike said, we're past our shelf life of this project in this field, and costs are going up to maintain if it stays open based on our next field report. But then also the challenges and impacts to programming when we have stoppages or cancellations based on conditions. So that was my role, just to be able to come in and discuss our communication process that we've been using, we'll continue to use leading up to the vote.
Thanks. So just to wrap up under the messages, I mentioned some of those in the beginning about where we're at in terms of the life of the facility. Certainly visiting the facility, the surface has deteriorated greatly. You can see up there about, if we talk about in the weeds of things here, it's certainly the wear of the fibers and the ability for those fibers to maintain the rubber to keep it safe for our kids and the people that use it. Talked a little bit already about the financial piece of it. This talks a little bit about the use that it gets. It's still heavily used, the facility, and will continue to be. And then it talks a little bit about, like Todd mentioned, some of those unaddressed issues too. So questions for either of us?
Thank you, sir. Does anybody have any questions for Todd or Michael? Mr. Hamlin?
I just had one quick question, Mike. You referenced at the outset that you had great success negotiating through competitive bidding last time around to drive those numbers down. I know this is going before the voters for not to exceed. Will you have a similar opportunity to do that going forward, or is this already locked in?
No, I'm certainly believe that we will have some work ahead of us to do those negotiations and get the best possible price that we can, and use that money wisely and But our goal certainly would not be to exceed that, certainly. So we'd have to work within our framework there. Wood and Curran was very helpful with, as everybody knows, the cost of things have just gone through the roof. And so it's substantially different than it was when we were looking at things in 2019.
Thank you. Any others? No? All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming by. Our next one is an update from our tax assessor, Mr. Nick Cloutier. He's going to give us a presentation on the tax commitment. Bear with me, Nick. I'm trying to get
Yeah,
a
of
better
course.
version of this.
Yeah.
It wasn't letting me go full screen.
I'd also emailed you a PowerPoint version if that's.
Yeah, this computer doesn't have anything that plays PowerPoint on it,
Okay.
so it just makes my life just a little bit easier. Okay.
Excellent. Well, because there's already resources out there and some communication, both on the town website and through other sources of media, I won't go through every little detail that encapsulates the tax commitment, which properties went up by which amount, or other such details, but we can certainly address that if anyone has questions. This is more of an overview of the highlights, if you will, and an opportunity to ask any clarifying questions that you think the public might want to be made aware of. So some of the points I will hit in this overview is just the general bullet points of here's the differences year over year. And then where did the value change come from of taxable value of properties, both real estate and personal property. And then the sales ratio analysis, that's getting at what is the assessed value, which is the basis for property taxes, versus what is the actual selling prices of properties now in this current market. And then just a little bit of forward looking, what's coming ahead in the next year or two. On this slide, I'm just alluding to the fact that the reason why I won't go into all the nitty-gritty detail is because we've tried very diligently to make that already publicly available in lengthy documents, mostly on the landing page of the assessing website. And it's also the assessor commitment report is also part of the agenda packet. Furthermore, through public bringing to my attention things they'd like to see more of or know more about, we've made more and more resources available on the assessing website. So there's links to state resources about sales. There's links to how-to documents we've created to how to understand your property card. So when you want to contact us, you have a frame of reference for the information. Those are the high-level overview points of this year's tax commitment. The assessed value date is April 1st every year in the state of Maine. We committed taxes for the fiscal year 22 commitment on August 12th, which was a little bit ahead of last year's date of August 21st. And the tax rate went from 1486 up to 1502. That is a relatively modest increase, barely over 1% increase over last year. And there was a series of articles, both ones I wrote and ones that counselors wrote that were in the Leader and on the website that are explain why, but a couple of the main points why the increase was less than expected, because the initial budget had said it might be 2.5, something like that. There was more general purpose aid from the state that was accounted for. If we received it, we would lower the tax rate accordingly from the increased revenues by a portion of those funds. And also the valuation of the town from new construction in town mostly was higher than anticipated from the number that was used at the budget process. We had estimated 90 million in new value and it was closer to 118 million. This is just a slide to explain some of the sources of value change every year. They don't change the type of sources, but the values change. So increases every year will primarily be due to new construction. That includes additions and renovations, as well as new structures, both residential and commercial. And that means if something is only 50% completed on April 1st of a given year, that sets its tax obligation for that entire year. And then the following year, it goes to 100% complete. It's doubled in value perhaps. And then also when a large lot splits into several smaller ones, each of those smaller entities are worth more summed up than the one large one together because of the potential for what can be done with them. And I'll get to the other, but an example of that would be properties that were exempt becoming taxable, like the former firehouse, for example. And also if a property has a change in use to a higher taxable value. Decreases in value. The abated value from year over year from last year's commitment was roughly 8.6 million. So value that was on certain properties that was reduced by an appeals process brought to my attention. But I'll note that not only is that significantly less than the prior year, which was closer to 50 million after the reval year with over 500 abatements, that was only the result, the 8.6 million last year of only 50 total abatements. And the majority of that 8.6 comes from two taxpayers, which were larger commercial entities, and one of which was a multi-year settlement agreement back from 2018. So just those two appeals accounted for 7 million of that 8.6. So I'm pleased to say that although anyone that brings to our attention some inconsistencies needing review, there were far less than previous years. So that means we're getting things right more often than not. The homestead exemption every year through our publication, as well as the states of that benefit allowable to residents that own their primary residence in Scarborough. More and more people apply for it. So there was a net increase of about 169 new residents that were able to get it this year. Some lost it, but even more gained it. And that reduces their tax burden, the overall by over 4 million to the town. And then personal property, which is assessed to businesses, the taxable went down. That tends to happen each year lately because more and more goes to an exempt status for Betty, business exempt tax exemption. If it's certain types of properties, it's a state level program to incentivize buying new machinery and equipment for certain businesses, so it won't be taxable, and we're reimbursed on half of that value. And then just one point about the other. In both instances, corrections and reviews could go up or down when things are brought to our attention, or in the course of seeing an inconsistency in our system, we review all properties for that same issue, and it can go up or down. And when that occurs, we bring it to the property owner's attention well in advance of commitment, so they have a chance to discuss or ask for an inspection if they'd like that. This is another very high level overview of how we get to that positive 118 million increase year over year from last year. The first number is largely due to new construction and development. The second number, the 37 million, is an example of if you have larger parcels split into others, it's not just the land, but also the buildings on those new ones. So for example, the Innovation District, the whole new phase came on. Well, that created 20 new lots, and some of those have buildings on them now too. That's part of that 37 there. And then on the negative portion of things, that top number also includes the aforementioned abatements, as well as reviews and corrections brought to our attention in the course of review that we lowered the amount by as applicable. So we can go to the next one.
Sorry, I just
Oh, no
got
worries.
word that the slideshow wasn't showing up on YouTube, so I'm just,
Oh, okay.
keep going, I'll check it out.
Sure.
Yeah.
So even more so than numbers, sometimes people speak to, well, where are the sources of value in town? What are the new things happening? And these are some of the biggest impact on where those millions came from. Most notably in the Downs, over 28 million of new value in the last year alone. And that seems to be on par. You know, we would expect that in the coming year as well for continued development there. In the non-residential, so more commercial and industrial, CMP had additional substation development, which increased their self-reporting of their taxable value, which we review by over 8 million, and Abbott Labs did significant renovations to their primary facility, which I toured and inspected multiple times, and that increased by approximately 8 million as well. And the Beacon, the Gateway Commons, those apartments finished their final phase of development. All of the buildings in that first, was it 10 or 12 buildings of development finally completed this past year. So their final 4.7 million this year completed those structures in that development. And then ongoing every year, there's homes built all over town, which add value as much as anywhere from 200,000 to $1 million, depending on the size or location of the home. But these subdivisions in themselves, say if they have 5 to 10 every year, if they're in a new phase of development, that adds to the taxable value base quite significantly. And in that last one, the two last ones, cottages at Sawyer and Holbrook Farm, are newer ones. So they just came online, but they'll start adding to that total in the coming year or two. This was requested by a number of taxpayers as well as council members in a past year, and I thought I'd start including it. It shows the year over year for different categories of properties on the former slide, and it doesn't tell the intricacies of the story, but what it does tell is it seems to be we're shifting the balance slightly, slowly but surely, less on residential property owners and more to non-residential commercial entities. If you see the percentage of the entire tax base, increasing on non-residential from 22.8 up to 23.7. That trend very well could continue, but perhaps it might change in a revaluation because residential real estate has seen a significant increase lately, but that probably won't catch up to a revaluation if at all. This is just a primer on a very basic concept, but kind of guides a lot of my practices. The assessed value, what we judge the market value to be, is supposed to be as closely as possible a reflection of the market value, so the sales price. As long as it's roughly equivalent to other properties, it's okay if it's off over time. But an example would be if you have an assessed home value of 300,000 and it sells for 325. The ratio there is 92%. So what does that mean for us? In sales occurring from 18 to 19 in that time range, right after the revaluation, the sales were at 96%, very close. And in the other year mentioned there, 19 through 20, with only a couple months of the pandemic at the tail end of it, we're at 93% overall. In the year following that, where we've seen maybe more dramatic shifts in the market, whether or not related to the pandemic, that percentage has decreased, and I'll show it in an upcoming slide, but it's closer to the 85% for the following year period of which we most recently assessed. But the way the certified assessment ratio works for the state's purposes, which determines our reimbursement rates of exemptions for homestead of monies and Betty monies, you're allowed to, as an assessor for the town's purposes, round up by 10%. And if you certify at 100% with the state for giving commitment, you get all of those monies due to the town. You run the risk of getting less than that if you go below 90%, which we may, but it's always a 2-year span when you feel the impacts. So the 100% ratio for fiscal year 22 commitment, which was actually based on the 96% from the reval year. So we won't see the impacts potentially till fiscal year 24. So this coming year will still be at 100% fiscal year 23. These are just some high-level overview of the sales that are qualified, meaning arm's length transactions, a willing buyer, willing seller, they don't know each other, no special circumstances. The assessed value to the sales price, the average on the top is for single-family residences that are non-waterfront, the average sale price and the average assessed value. That computes to the aforementioned ratios. But and then also the median, which is another factor, is roughly equivalent in this instance. And as you see below, the different types of properties, excluding waterfront, are roughly equivalent, which is a positive thing to see. So there doesn't seem to be a disparity. And with the waterfront, I would cue that up to the small sample size. If you have one very extreme case or two, it skews the data, but it's very positive for an assessor to see data that is in alignment among different property types, because it signals fairness and equality. Market conditions. I'm sure some of you could speak to this from your different realms of work, but just to spitball some ideas of what might be going on. The average person sees the selling prices are certainly increased over the last year. People deduce it might be from supply and demand issues, lower housing inventory, increased construction costs, ability to work remotely might drive people to different locations, and low interest rates as well. Whether or not we speculate about the causes, it's clear that the sales prices, particularly of residential homes, has increased quite dramatically in the last year. People can speculate whether or not that has slowed in the last month or two, but I would just say maybe it's plateaued, but that's even hard to tell. The assessing profession is very retrospective, so we don't start to judge things till a year after it's occurred in most instances. So the only trend I can tell you about is that last year, our assessed to sales ratio has decreased because the prices go up and our assessments stay the same until we do a revaluation again. And the impacts of COVID-19 on April 1st for 2020, there were little to no impacts, in my opinion, because the pandemic had just started. So what had occurred before that, the whole year prior, didn't have much bearing on that particular assessment date. When you get to April 1st, 2021, it's certainly arguable, but the fact that the residential sales clearly has been a positive boon in terms of the sales values. The commercial would be in question, but I believe based on the sales data and other data I've seen for Scarborough, perhaps they were underassessed or not impacted in the same manner as you might expect, in the sense that the sales seemingly are coming in at the same relative ratio of the 85 to 87% range. That said, some may be aware that other towns that did revaluations in the recent year kind of took a stance on whether or not they thought commercial properties should shift and residential ones should go up. The town of Scarborough, having done a revaluation in 2019 so recently, and feeling pretty confident with the data we saw, I felt confident not making any changes widespread, but rather addressing individual properties as needed if information was brought to my attention. And that continues to be the policy, and it's seeming to be an accurate understanding of Scarborough's market. And there's plenty of evidence, to support that it would only be a case-by-case instance if a person has information to bring to my attention that we seem to be fair and equitable thus far. So looking ahead in the coming year, for state exemptions, the solar renewable energy exemption program has been around already for a year, but the town of Scarborough up until now has not taxed solar entities. They've just assessed them to keep track of them. This year, because the state has explained better the reimbursement process and how to help the taxpayer apply for the exemption, we will begin in this next fiscal year taxing them and then allowing them to apply for the exemption. Any residential entity will be eligible for the exemption because it's anything under 5 megawatts. And anything above that is clearly utility scale selling back to the grid. And even then, they try to remain under 5 megawatts in order to get the exemption. So we sent out those letters to homeowners earlier this week, and they should be receiving them. And we're giving them several months. They don't have to have that into us until April 1st to continue to be exempted for those properties, but the town will be receiving a benefit now. That's the difference. The homestead exemption, there was a new law, LD 221, that the state passed that will increase the reimbursement rate to towns from 70% of the lost value to 73% next year, and an additional 3% every year until it reaches 100% back to the town. I was really excited to hear that, because whenever they're looking to give the town more of what is lost without any detriment to the taxpayer, that's a good thing. The actual dollars, had it happened last year, 73% versus 70, would have been 60,000 more in revenue. So it seemingly modest, but over time that will increase 3% every year, and that will be more and more beneficial to the town. Along the homestead exemption lines, there are other things proposed legislation, including increasing it again from 25 to 30 or 25 to 50. But I think because of the financial implications of that and the administrative burden, it hasn't gained traction yet, but it's still on the books as proposed. And then in terms of TIF districts, we just had a workshop before this meeting discussing the potential for changing capture amounts and what that might mean. A specific CEA, the New England Expedition CEA, is nearing its completion in the next year because the maximum annual was 825,000 of returned funds for increased value. The maximum for the total life of that CEA was 8.25 million, and it will be reaching that this year with the final 550,000. And we can discuss the intricacies of what happens next, but the short of it is the captured funds go back into the Haggis TIF to help pay down the burden of the debts for the improvements in that. And we can discuss that at a different date of the mechanics of how that would look. The townwide revaluation, if you remember back in December of last year, I had brought forward some proposals for doing revaluations in town more frequently and how that might look, and doing as much of it as possible managed in-house. I'm pleased to say that we've been doing some of the legwork in terms of data analysis and improving the quality of our data all along since then. And in terms of the next steps of when it will occur, I had proposed the plan for being 2 years from now, so April 1st, 23, fiscal year 24. And if for some reason it takes more administrative time to do the proper messaging, or there's other reasons, it could very well be the year following. There's two options there. One being 4 years after the prior one, and one being 5 years. The point being not going 15 again because of the burdens that allows, for the dramatic changes in values. What I put here is the certified ratio below 100. I had led to that point earlier, but because next year they'll be looking at the sales this year at 85% of market value for residences, that won't be able to certify us at 100 for fiscal year 24. So the benefit of doing a revaluation that year would mean we could still continue to get full funding from the state's reimbursement programs if we were not to do a revaluation that year, but rather the year after, we would go a year with receiving less funds. So that's a judgment call on those finances. That's all I have. I meant to be brief. I was a little more than that, but I hope it was informative. And the takeaway is, since taking this job almost 2 years ago, people told me they wanted to be more informed, and I try my best to do that both in person and even more so through written materials available on the website, and I hope it helps.
Thank you, sir. Any questions for Mr. Cloutier?
I have a question.
Yep, Councilor
So
Anderson.
can you explain the solar renewable energy exemption one more time? So is it in the past, if somebody had solar panels on their home, it wasn't included in their value, and now it is going to be, but they can file for an exemption, and you said we get a benefit, the town will get a benefit from that. Can you
That's
explain
exactly
the
correct.
benefit?
So this tax commitment year, if you had solar panels, it was a zero value on your assessment, but it was denoted. And this coming year, next commitment, it will have a value, and we will, if you apply for the exemption, you will have no increase in your taxes, but we will get that money back from the state because the state wants to incentivize those types of developments.
So we really want people to file that exemption. so
Yeah,
the state can-
and that's why we mailed out a copy of the exemption form to every owner of solar on record this week. They have till April 1st to bring that in. And just hitting home the point already made, October 15th is the deadline for the senior property tax program. And we've contacted those people multiple times and also leader articles, newsletter articles, and we have very high rate of return. There's only some stragglers that are on our list that we're still waiting for.
Counselor-
Yeah, I just wanted to, I got your, your exemption form today, because I have solar panels on my barn.
Okay.
And I'm already digging through trying to find all the answers to all those crazy questions. But yes, John, they did go out.
And I should have said in that letter, if I didn't, do the best you can. I know some of those details are highly scientific and mathematic. If you don't have the original documentation, it might be difficult, but if you do the best you can, we'll be able to help you figure it out.
Any more?
I had a quick question. First of all, thanks for the great work you've done in a short period of time. And I think your transparency and just the amount of activity in your process and content is just a tremendous contribution. So thank you to you and your team for that. I was a little disappointed with the residential, non-residential shift. We had something like a percent or two, I guess it was, over the past 3 years. I know we're just getting started, with the downs and that sort of thing. But, we had hopes that we'd try to be able to shift that from 80-20 residential, non-residential to the other way around. I mean, doesn't look like we're going to make much progress at this rate. Do you have any prediction on that or any?
Rather
thoughts on that?
than a prediction, I would say that although that does look skewed, I would say it's more favorable than 90% of towns. I'd venture to say 99% of towns, but I don't know for certain towns with large mills or whatnot. But I mean, despite that disparity of 70 something to 20 something, that's quite good. And that is actually a very fair reduced burden. Many towns have 90% or more of the burden on the homeowners.
Great. One last question. I had on a slide here, a historic view of taxable value, tax rates and budgets.
Yeah.
And I just was doing some quick math and I think for the past 10 years, it was something like 4% a year average change in the annual budget. And then, what is that? 40% for 10 years. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? That seems like it's not really sustainable. And I don't know how much control we have over it, particularly if it's being driven by what's happening with appreciation and resident, and general real estate values. So
Was that one of the slides on the commitment report? One of the pieces of paper on that towards the beginning of it? If you're asking about the change in budget year over year, I'm pleased to say the assessor has no part in that. So I would defer to the other aspects of town government, including the council, because all the assessor has, joking aside, all the assessor has reign over is assessing the values. So there's two parts of the equation: how much money needs to be raised, and it's divided by all the value in town. Well, the assessing office is only on one side of that equation, so I don't have an opinion on it, but I could see why you might.
Thanks. You might point us in the direction of who we might talk to about that, but thank you. Thanks very
I think
much.
he just did, but I could be mistaken.
Help.
Nick, I'm not accepting any more questions. You've been crushing it since you've been hired. Thank you very much. There's been a marked improvement in the way we've communicated this type of data, and I think we're all very grateful. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, we're on to order number 21079. It is a 7 PM public hearing only, and it is on the proposed amendments to chapter 405, the Town of Scarborough zoning ordinance, section 9, performance standard 01, utility scale solar energy systems. This is a public hearing only. We had first reading last meeting. I do have one email to read. So before I read the email, is there anybody that would like in front of me that would like to speak to this? Going up, sir, and just state your full name and address.
Good evening. My name is Dan Dickinson. I am here representing two property owners, actually, that I'm involved with. One being the property owner of 40 Holmes Road. And there's 3 parcels there that equal 18.3 acres, 18.3 acres. Just want to run, so you know what parcels I'm referring to. It's R039, 015, 013, and 011. Again, owned by White Pine LP, and it's within the light industrial zone. The second owner is White Pine Land Company LLC, and they have 2 parcels equaling 8 acres, and those parcel references are R039, 015A, and 010. Both property owners are in the same position of wanting to make a statement about the minimum lot size of 25 acres. And they're both the property owners feel a little bit neglected on this, where we're in a light industrial zone, and this would seemingly be a good use, even if it were for a short period of 20 years, to do either a small 1 megawatt project on the 8-acre smaller owner property, or the 18.3 acre parcel by the White Pine property. So thought long and hard on how to address this, and maybe the best way to approach would be to see if these parcels could be included. And maybe you keep the 25 acre minimum, excluding the light industrial zone, or at minimum allow these 2 owners to have their properties be included within the ordinance change. I think that's pretty simple to say. There's 2 owners. White Pine White Pine LP has 18.3 acres, and the LLC White Pine has 8 acres, both of which could at least do a 1 megawatt project. Not necessarily is there any plans to do so, but when this changes, we could certainly get working on such a thing. And we wouldn't be able to do that if there's a 25 acre minimum. Additionally to that, both owners are not pleased with the 50-foot setback that the ordinance would be changed to. I guess it's just as simple to say that if the building can be put 25 feet from the property line, why can't a solar panel? Maybe that's better in an RF zone, rural farm, or RFM. But being in a light industrial zone that was just changed in 2013, I just think that's a little bit overkill. And especially if we're talking about a 1 megawatt or 2 megawatt project on an 8-acre parcel, that added 25 feet to the setback reduces the power output of that project. I think it's unnecessary. So at minimum, we just kind of looking at a request to be added to the ability to do a project between 1 and 5 megawatts. And back to being into the light industrial, I think that would be appropriate. I don't know how you would word it, but maybe just add us to the list of people that can do it, and maybe they leave the language alone the way it is. Just add us to the list. And that's all I have. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, sir. Anybody on Zoom before I read the email? Is there anybody on Zoom that would like to speak? Marco, you are up.
Sure. I don't know if you can see me, but can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. We can't see you, but we're going to keep it that way. Yep.
Sure. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. Marco Anizio speaking on behalf of Blue Wave Solar, and just want to give our support for the ordinance tonight and implore the council to enact, given LD 936 and the for the state that ends for December 31st, and if we enact in reasonable time, it will give reasonable and appropriate time for the project to be permitted that we are currently working on in Johnson Road. So just wanted to have that stated for public record and demonstrate our support for this ordinance as it's written. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mazurski, I think I probably butchered that. Mazurowski, like I said. You are up.
There we go. Can you hear me?
We can, yep.
Thanks very much. And that was well said the second time. So it's a tough one. So I'm Nick Mazurowski, a Scarborough resident and co-founder of Dirigo Solar. We are developing the 5 megawatt project on the Kimberly Clark landfill west of 95. I'll keep my comments brief. I'm sure the council and planning staff is kind of sick of hearing from me. And I'll just reiterate, Blue Wave's comments. I provided written comments earlier this week. In short, we support the ordinance. It's a product of a multi-year process, and I'd like to thank the planning staff, the planning board, and the council for their efforts. As I wrote, time is now of the essence because of the grandfathering restrictions set in place this past summer. And so projects do need to actually obtain their conditional use permits from towns by the end of December. If not, they will lose their ability to sell power directly to main homes, businesses, and municipalities. So again, time is of the essence, and I respectfully request the ordinance be passed. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. Any others in Zoom? Okay, I'm going to close out Zoom and I'll read my one email. This email is from Miss Allison Bristol. She's at 6 Bayview Avenue here in Scarborough. It says, "Dear councilors, in advance of tonight's public hearing on the proposed amendments to Chapter 405 to allow utility scale solar development, I'm writing to once again express my concern with the proposed zoning map, which would allow utility scale solar farms to be sited in residential areas along Black Point and Sparwink Road, and to once again ask the councilor to alternatively consider establishing an overlay zone that would only allow these industrial in nature sightings in more remote, non-residential areas of Scarborough. I also want to bring to your attention Maine Audubon's renewable energy siting tool, based on siting principles developed by Maine Audubon biologists and ecologists. This GIS mapping tool was launched last month to provide a resource to developers and decision makers on where to best site solar and land-based wind projects to avoid or minimize negative impact to important wildlife habitats. The layered map follows a red, yellow, green shaded stoplight overlay model to indicate areas compatible and not compatible with renewable energy projects. The red shaded areas indicate locations where solar and wind development should be avoided, such as in rare species habitats, wetland areas, and while green shaded areas indicating locations where Maine Audubon encourages development, such as landfills and gravel pits. And she goes on to give us the link. So I won't give you the link, but as you will see, approximately 95% of the land east of Route 1 and approximately 80% of the land east of I-95 is shaded red. The minutes from the August 4th Sustainability Committee indicated that the committee would support a solar overlay zone primarily west of I-95, yet this was not presented or discussed at ordinance council's first read or the September 20th planning board meeting. A primarily west of I-95 overlay would be consistent with the Maine Audubon Society recommendation and still help Scarborough meet goals set forth in the Sustainability Committee's Comprehensive Energy and Sustainability Plan and in the 2021 Comprehensive Plan without compromising the aesthetics and the quality of life for the otherwise impacted residential neighborhoods. I respectfully ask the council to consider the overlay approach. There is still time to revise and adopt a new zoning map in advance of the LD 692 moratorium. As always, thank you for your time and consideration. And with that, I'll pause, see if there's anybody else. Just as a reminder, this is just a public hearing. This will be slated for second reading, which is typically our final reading or is the final reading at our next meeting, which is 2 weeks from today. So everybody that spoke, thank you very much. And we appreciate all the feedback. With that, we're on to order number 21080. It's a 7 p.m. public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendments to Chapter 1301, the General Assistance Ordinance pursuant to Title 22 MRSA 43054, the General Assistance. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak to this? I believe there's no one. This is pretty straightforward, but is Liam here, Tom, or did you just want to? Yep. Liam, did you want to come in real quick and? All right, you're up, Liam.
So again, this was an item that was introduced last meeting. This is a routine update of GA maximums. It's obligated by the council to adopt the maximums as set by DHHS, so it's really more of a formality. The only notable change is a increase to GA housing allotments, which again was referenced last meeting.
Thank you, sir. There's nobody in the public that'd like to speak. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? No? Tracy?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Order number 21081 is a 7 PM public hearing only on the proposed amendment to chapter 302A. It's boards and committees manual by adding a section quote broadcasting of meetings. This is a public hearing only, so like the other public hearing, we'll listen to any comments on it. I see none. With that, I'll close the public hearing and this will be set for second reading at our next meeting. Quick point of order, Tracy, would it be too unorthodox to bump order 21088 to now so our guest can come and go? I just feel like we have about 45 more minutes of business. Sue, do you want to do that? Sure. All right, I feel like you're here specific. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So without any objections, I am going to, sorry, I lost my order. Without any objections, I am going to adjust the agenda. I am going to take order number 21088 now. Any objections? No, and I apologize for anybody watching. I know that Sue's been waiting patiently and. Okay, order number 21088 is a first reading and to schedule a second reading to approve the expenditure in the amount not to exceed $200,000 from the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund for the purpose of purchasing the so-called Libby property located more specifically identified by the Scarborough Tax Assessor's Map on R054 Lot 23, as recommended by the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and authorize the town manager to execute any and all documents that are necessary to protect the town's interest. And Ms. Foley Ferguson, I will show your presentation, or would you like to speak first?
Let me speak first.
Yep, you just order me around.
Okay, you can go ahead if you'd like to, and put up one of the parcel maps.
Yep, just give me 1 second. Just like stuff.
I can speak over it because it
Okay.
doesn't matter. So I'm the chair of the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and we also have the executive director of the Land Trust here, Andrew Mackey, if you have any questions about this, and another member of my board, Rachel Hendrickson. You have in your hands, you have a letter of recommendation. We would like to recommend that you approve an expenditure of $200,000 to assist the Land Trust in purchasing the Douglas W. Libby property on 114. It's on the Nonsuch River as well, and we'll show you some pictures of it. But before I do that, I do want to make a couple of distinctions, because in the past, when the press has covered these meetings, they've really screwed it up. These funds that we're asking you to approve come from voter-approved funds, and they're a reserve fund. They are not called the Scarborough Land Trust Fund. They are not the Scarborough Land Trust either. They are reserve funds, and actually, officially, the town of Scarborough calls them the Land Acquisition Reserve Fund, but those funds were approved by voters in several different referendums, and the last one was in 2019 for $2.5 million. It does not mean that there's $2.5 million sitting out there for us to spend on land acquisition. What it means is when a project comes to the town of Scarborough, the town evaluates whether or not they'd like to help with the purchase. Many of the projects, in fact, probably 90% of them were from the Scarborough Land Trust, but the Scarborough Land Trust is a nonprofit 501c3 and relies on private donations and private funding, whereas these funds are a reserve fund. They also have, I gave some of people, I presented what has been purchased in the past. As you can see, it's not just a land acquisition fund either. It protected the Danish Village Archway and the Beech Ridge Schoolhouse and the AMVets building recently. So just so that people are aware of that, we've also leveraged almost 100% of the money, 4 million out of the 5 that's been spent already. And the first 3 referendums took about 18 years to spend. So even though they are approved in, say, 2000, 2003, they won't be spent until the projects come online. So that's the first thing. And then I guess the second thing would be that when I really like people to focus on the fact that conserving land is a long-term investment in the community. The actual benefits of preserving land far exceeds the initial costs. And although, we incur some debt service, it's not just the aesthetics and the wildlife that we're protecting. We're also protecting the value, which what the tax assessor just talked about, the value of our properties. The economic value to protecting open space in our community is really, really important. It increases valuation of abutting properties, for one thing, and it also provides outdoor recreation and revenues from hunting and fishing and the such. And people who want to live here because there's things to do close by. It's also, believe it or not, you only saw one side, and that is the tax revenue. You didn't see the expenditures and how it costs for residential development. But it's cheaper to buy open land than it is for residential development. So for all of those reasons, I hope you'll look at this as a long-term investment in our community, because the citizens sure did. So this project is coming from the Land Trust, the Scarborough Land Trust, and they brought it to us, I don't know if it was a year ago or whatever, but it's a super important project. It's 16 acres of land off of Route 114, and it is adjacent to the Warren Woods property, which is a huge property. Were you able to find the slides at all?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got stuck in full screen mode there for a second. You
No,
want the
that's-
ones that are in the agenda, or do you like the tour?
I'll do the live one
The
first.
tour? Okay.
Yeah, because this is pretty important.
Yeah, and I apologize for that.
No, this is good. This is a Nunsuch River tour, a virtual tour that's a project between the Scarborough Library, the Friends of the Marsh, and the Land Trust. And it's really interesting. Anybody who's watching this at home can get online and look up the Nunsuch River tour, and you can find that there's the URL up at the top. You're just really unbelievable, Paul, with all this. I just have to say, you're really good at whipping all over
It's
the
because
place.
I don't listen to what anybody says.
I was just
That's
going to say, yeah, how could you even follow what's
Yeah,
being
right.
said? So anyway, what you can see that's important about this project, can you move the slide up a little bit just
Yep.
to get the whole? What you see right there is the Nunsuch River. The Nunsuch River surrounds a huge portion of Scarborough, and I don't know if everybody realizes it, but it actually starts in Saco. And it goes all the way around, and it finally, and the cursor is going all the way down to the ocean here. And it feeds into the mouth of the Scarborough Marsh with the Scarborough River. So it's a really important piece of Scarborough. It's important for wildlife habitat. It's important for water quality. It's important for resilience, for climate change and flooding and those kinds of things. So that's why these guys are putting this project together. There is a location right there at Gorham Road. And you can, well, look at, this is the parcel that we're asking you to purchase. There's 1,200 feet of the Nunsuch River, and it would help protect water quality and wildlife habitat for birds and animals, recreational trails, and it connects to 1.4 miles of trails on the Warren Woods property. It also abuts across the street. It's not really abutting, but it is across the street, the Windward development, some land there. At least 65% of the property is considered to be in the top 25% of the what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service believes to be the most important land to protect. And it has to do with the fact that it's a riverine system that's got meadows and forest. And water, everything all at once, all together. And it's adjacent to another big parcel of land. You guys know that the comprehensive plan said that protecting the Scarborough Marsh and all of the town's natural resources is one of the most important things. The Nonsuch River is actually 24.9 miles. And it's super, super important. So with that, I wanted to show you maybe just the parcel or just show for the people at home, and I can answer any questions that you have, or Andrew's available also to answer any questions that you have.
Does anybody have any questions as I pull up the parcel? Anybody? Please?
Oh, ask a question. Okay, let me talk about the.
Yeah, talk some more.
Okay, let me talk about the Scarborough Land Bond Referendum. So there was one in 2000, 2003, 2009, and 2019. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 of them for a total of 10 million. Now we've only spent 5 million and it took 18 years, but we purchased at least 10 properties and over 1,000 acres have been protected. So that's pretty incredible. I have to say that I don't think there's another town in the state of Maine that has really invested in purchasing. I mean, it's great because we are really, really huge residential development type of a town, and everybody thinks of it like that. But if we can continue to protect properties, it's gonna benefit. It's gonna benefit us both in tax rates and also in just in the quality of life. I saw that you had that, Paul.
I do.
There it is.
Yep.
So you can see on the big, large green parcel there, sort of lime green, that's the Warren Woods. The red parcel there is the Douglas W. Libby parcel. The reason why this is sometimes called the Libby Warren parcel, just so you know, is because the land trust has the Libby River. At least I'm assuming that, Andrew. I don't even know if that's the truth, but we started calling it the Libby Warren property just to define it from the Libby property off of Black Point Road. So you can see how the trails, and there already is a trail. Mr. Libby, oh, I should mention this. This is a bargain sale also. The owner is decreasing the value by 200,000. So the purchase price is not market value. Yes, there's tax benefits for them, but this is usually very, very generous. When a person comes to you, this person really wants their land to live in perpetuity and all of the things that are there.
Good. Is there any members of the public that would like to speak to this before we talk about it? Because this is first reading, so we do have a first reading. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I apologize for butchering the presentation a little bit there. With that, I'll take a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, any discussion? Councilor Caterina?
Yeah, I'm happy to see that we are continuing to invest in land that's important to the town and to the future of the town. And I certainly encourage my fellow councilors to support this because I certainly will.
Thank you. Any others? Council Cucci?
Yeah, it's an exciting opportunity. I had the opportunity to attend a presentation at Cabela's. There's a fundraising side of this as well. It's not just town funds, and the owner is kicking some in as well. So, you know, it takes a lot to make these things happen. It takes a lot of time usually, and there's a lot of people that have done a lot of work to pull this together. Fully supportive, fully in line with what the Land Bond Acquisition Fund was set up for and is intended to accomplish. So thank you for all your work on this.
Council Hamel?
Yeah, this is an important initiative, I think, for us strategically and for a number of other reasons, climate and environmental as well. You know, our 48 square mile town, 16% of it is an open space. If you take out the marsh, it's only 6%. So we really need to keep working at holding that percentage and increasing it. And efforts like this will help us do that. Thank you.
Council Anderson?
I just want to say I support this. I think it's a great use of those funds, and thank you, Ms. Foley Ferguson, for coming today and kind of setting a really good stage for all the reasons why we need to support this. You know, it really does align with our comprehensive plan. We have a specific vision focused on, you know, preserving town natural resources. And I think this is just an excellent example of how we can do that.
Good. Any others? With that, I will take a vote. Tracy?
Counselor Tucci,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes. Thank you. And with that, we were going to take a 5-minute recess. So if you're here for matters and want to sneak out, you can, and we will see everybody in 5 minutes. welcome back, everybody. Thank you for your patience while we took a quick 7-minute break. We are now back on to order number 21083. It's a public hearing and action on a renewal request for junkyard permits pursuant to Title 30A MRSA Chapter 183, Goldstein Steel Company Incorporated, located at 36 Running Hill Road, A. Gagnon and E. Perry Iron and Metal, located at.
I think you skipped an item. You should be at order 81.
No, we did the broadcast of meetings.
No, we
The
didn't.
public hearing, yeah, it just, nobody spoke of it.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
My
you're right.
mistake.
Keep going.
Very rarely am I right on those usually.
Apologies, sir.
No, you probably, I'll take it under advisement. Okay, so I'm gonna just pick up where I was. Located at Rigby Road, Speedway Auto, located at 343 Payne Road, and SVR New England LP DBA Scarborough Recycling, located at 40 Holmes Road, formerly Scarborough Auto Parts. Tracy, is everything in order here? Okay. It is a public hearing. Is there anybody in the public that would like to speak over Zoom? No, Zoom is officially empty. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Okay, Tracy?
Council Cludier,
Yes.
Council Johnson,
Yes.
Council Anderson,
Yes.
Council Hamel,
Yes.
Council Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Order number 21084 is a 7 PM public hearing and action on a new request for food handler's license from Maine Baking Company LLC DBA Pizza by Fire, located at 51 Dynamic Drive, number 4, and Ocean Team Property DBA Blue Ocean Seafood Incorporated, located at 340 and 350 Pine Point Road. Tracy, everything in order with this? Okay, there's nobody here in the public, so can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Tracy?
Council Clucci,
Yes.
Council Johnson,
Yes.
Council Anderson,
Yes.
Council Hamel,
Yes.
Council Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes. Resolution number 21001 is an act in support of resolution 20001 relating to the traffic impact fees for the Downs TMP. TMP stands for Traffic Movement Permit for those at home. I'll let Tom introduce this. There is a wholesale amendment that Councilor Clucci will offer up that he's been working on with Tom this, probably the past week, I would say, and sidely with me and Mr. Anderson, I would say as well. So, Tom, if you want to give us a introduction, we'll put it on the floor, and then I'll ask for the amendment. So.
Yes, the primary reason for this, and initially I had taken a tract of memo of understanding or some related document that really intended to state expectations and obligations of parties. That's essentially what MOU would do and what this action does as well. This is a bit different in that it's just stating what the town's intentions and expectations are. As was mentioned in the title, this is all related to the traffic movement permit that's been recently issued to Crossroads Holding for the Downs project. As part of that nearly 2-year process to negotiate the terms of that, Maine Department of Transportation was the lead, was leading that effort, if you will, and has really directed the town to use its traffic impact fees in certain districts anyway, for purposes of helping advance some of these important traffic improvements that the Downs is technically and legally required to make. So first and foremost, the purpose of this is for the council as a body to kind of state its intentions that we play a part going forward, and that we will, in fact, with subsequent action of council, authorize certain funds toward these efforts. The other component involves the town applying for a business partnership initiative. This is a state program. The reason we're involved is that the host municipality needs to be the recipient. And so again, it's just stating intentions really for the benefit of the Downs team that we will in fact apply on their behalf for each of the next 3 years. And that program is a reimbursement program. And so we'll kind of work through the administrative details of kind of flowing that money from the state through us to the Downs team again to help defray some of the expenses. I know there's been some concern. I went so far as to actually seek appropriation authority today for really monies that I don't need access to for years in the future. And I suspect what you'll hear this evening by way of an amendment is to really just allow that authorization to occur through the normal budget process. And just as an aside, as a practical matter, as soon as next year, FY '23, I expect you'll see all of these projects loaded into the 5-year CIP. The traffic movement permit is very, very specific in terms of what projects are done which year. And so I think, again, starting in the next fiscal year, we'll have all of them kind of in process. And then we'll seek and hopefully receive appropriation authority for the projects in the coming year, if you will. So long-winded way of explanation, but I think this traffic movement permit is monumental in so many respects. And for residents, they will see noticeable improvements. Again, worst case in a 5-year period, most of it will actually occur in the first 3 years. And it really is a great example of private development paying its way. The town, I think, being forward-looking and collecting fees from other developers for the past 3 decades, frankly, in some cases. And the state of Maine acknowledging that they've got some role to play in terms of solving these, not just regional, not just local, but regional solutions. So again, this is just kind of having the council take definitive action and state some intentions in the future in that regard.
Thank you, sir. Like I said, there is a sizable edit that's going to be put forth by Councilor Cucci. So without objection, we'll just put it on the floor and then have him immediately offer the amendment, and then we can just start discussion with that. So with that, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, and I'll ask Councilor Cucci now present his amendment.
Yeah, I'd like to offer an amendment. I shared with the council, Tom helped to draft this as well, earlier today. So it's not something that's included in the packet. I had some reservations with some of the items that were in the original proposal. Namely, a lot of them were procedural. So with the original request to appropriate funds tonight, our normal process is to do that through our budget process, right? And to do it in one meeting or a single meeting was probably one of my bigger concerns. That having been said, I wasn't opposed to a resolution that stated our intention that these funds should support the projects that, we've been trying to fund these projects for quite some time. So I don't know what the best way to, if I can introduce it by reference. I know that Paul, I think you can bring it up. I can walk through the red line version maybe.
The red line didn't translate to red line, so I'm going to take it off because it's very confusing.
Okay.
Because it didn't translate on the PDF.
So what I can do.
So
is
this is the
talk
final
through-
version we're looking at? Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
The red line version is in the email, just when it got converted to a PDF, it doesn't say what, right?
Okay, so I can talk through the changes. There's one whereas.
I can pull
clause.
them both up, actually. Here, I can work my magic on this. Bear with me.
Red line.
Yeah.
We're asking for everything tonight.
Yes.
Your repertoire.
I guess you
Glad
have
you're
to
there,
stay
Paul.
as chair.
That's a hard no. Okay. So this is the clean one. This is the red line. So this, John, why don't you talk about what you didn't like? This is the one that's in the packet. So I'll bring up.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the fourth whereas down was just something that was, to me, it wasn't real specific. So usually the whereas are statements of facts. This one said the town expects to terminate the collection of impact fees related to named impact fee ordinance herein. And it says the following appropriation of fees collected and expected to be collected in the near term relating to projects under development, but not yet under construction. I just didn't feel like that was necessary. I didn't fully follow it, thought it could be subject to misinterpretation. So I recommended striking that, and Tom was amenable to that as well.
And this version that just popped up has that whereas clause stricken.
So it's removed.
It's removed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Struck. A little later down in section 1, which is the order part of this resolution, where we're directing the town manager to do specific things. We revised that to say that the town council anticipates that the consideration of annual appropriations within the capital improvement budget process of the impact and mitigation fees identified below to improvements in the plan. The timing of such appropriations is expected to be consistent with the schedule for implementation of the improvements provided in the plan. The following amounts show the current accumulation of each impact and mitigation fees, but the town will continue to receive payments pursuant to relevant ordinances for development projects not yet under construction. And such additional amounts may appear in the future, annual appropriation requests. This is basically saying when we created this impact fee ordinance, we said we're going to spend them on these same projects that the Downs now is required to spend them on. We're going to hold our end of the bargain. We're going to actually spend them. And if we continue to collect more funds, those will go towards those projects as well. It's just saying it a little more clearly. Originally, this was worded to actually spend those now, to authorize the town manager to spend those now. Whereas this is now saying every year when we go through the budget, we're going to earmark impact fee funds for these projects. And then the last change related to the business partnership program with the state. It had originally included that we were going to also include some capital improvement funds, which I just didn't think was really necessary. I think I shortened it to say simply that we're going to apply to the business partnership program, which is a state program. And the intent of the program, I don't have a lot of documentation on it, but it's to encourage partnerships like we have with the Downs. And when that relationship exists, the state is sometimes willing to kick in some funds as well. So we have the ingredients for that to be somewhat of a success. So I think it makes a lot of sense for us to apply. Originally, the way it was worded, I wasn't clear if the town was going to also benefit from some of these reimbursements or if they're all going to go to the Downs. Typically, it would be a proportional share, I think, but I don't think we need to know the answer to that today or with the resolution. So that's why I just shortened it.
So what I'm going to do is that's a motion to amend those wholesale amendments. So I'll take a second on that.
Second.
And for simplicity, I'm going to call a vote just on the amendment. That way we're just then discussing the whole shebang. So with that, Tracy?
Yes.
No.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes. Now the resolution as amended is on the floor. So that way that just takes care of the housekeeping part of it. And now we're in discussion mode to pass this resolution or not with the wholesale edits that were referenced on my screen as I share it for Tracy for the one that is specifically on my screen titled Clean Version. So with that, we'll take discussion. Mr. Hamel.
So I've had a lot of questions on this, and I want to thank Tom and staff for providing follow-up information in more detail than probably anybody could stand, but he exceeded my request quite handsomely, and thank him for that. The main reason I was asking questions, and I think John Clucci touched on parts of this, was, how can we be certain that we're not simply reimbursing the Downs for impact fees that they're required to, pay anyway, and how can we be sure that they're not going to be paid until the work is done, and there were other issues there about how the work would be costed and then and then performed, and are we going to have a competitive bid process? Anyway, there were questions like that I had, in addition to where's the money and exactly what money is going to what purposes from whom. I don't think we have all the answers to those yet, but so I like what John did, which was what I understood is to kind of frame this as authorizing the process to appropriate, but the actual appropriation would be another matter that would come before us with real numbers in terms of who's writing the check and how much to whom. So, with that understanding is correct, I'm supporting this, as one step forward, but we're not done yet.
Council Johnson.
I have a question for the town manager. Tom, I just want to get, thought I heard something. I want to make sure I heard it clearly, that the DOT has directed the town to use the funds in our accounts. Can I ask what form that direction took?
Jay Chase has been here. I didn't receive that word directly, but I've been told countless times that there were countless times over the last nearly 24 months where that was abundantly clear.
Right.
Keep in
Anything,
mind-
because I was just reading, I went back to the only material I have, it's the TMP. I don't see any reference to it in there.
Well,
So it's-
aside from DP's expectations or intentions, the state statute that governs impact fees really dictates that we should be spending these monies within 10 years of receipt. In some of the districts in Payne Road, they are nearly 30 years old. So
yep.
I think that in part was was DOT's motivation to say, hey, you need to put these into practice. And it was really the Downs bringing the extra money to the table and being responsible to actually complete a project. The reason we haven't spent some of these monies is that we have not accumulated enough to actually do the project that was envisioned.
Yeah, I understand that. I was just wondering if the directive came from, a statement, a paper or something, but thank you for
Jay's
that.
here. Jay, did we get any written directive? I know Steve Landry, the state traffic engineer.
Yep. Yeah, and that's really where it came from, was in over the last 24 months, number of conversations with the state traffic engineer, Steve Landry, suggesting that now's the time for the town to activate these funds we've been collecting for 30 years, particularly as this relates to the Payne Road impact fee ordinance. We didn't receive a directive in writing per se. There's no sort of formal pending action. It was just sort of a general admonishment of the town that it's time to engage.
To use it. Yep. No, I agree. And thank you very much. So that being said, which I do believe the sentiment of the council and the town was to use these funds, I'm not going to support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others? Counselor Anderson.
Yeah, I'm gonna support it, and I also want to thank Councilor Clucci for taking a stab at adjusting some procedural items. I did have some concern about preserving the integrity of the budget process when this first came forward, and I think a lot of those concerns have been addressed. So thank you, Councilor Clucci, for bringing that forward.
Any others? Tom, I asked you this, I think privately, but just what purpose does this serve? Like what does this serve for? For instance, can it be used as a collateral for financing at a bank, or what purpose are we doing it for?
Yeah, I can't answer that about collateral. Yeah, I think it would have been a great value before the TMP was actually issued to the Downs, because after that was issued, they are legally and financially obligated to do the improvements. So I see this as goodwill, us, and more importantly, the town council, as opposed to simply staff over the last 24 months saying, yeah, we think this is good. Having the legislative body acknowledge an obligation, if you will, and intention going forward. Had it also, if I was also receiving appropriation authority, it would have much more legal weight than as currently drafted, as amended, if you will. But I think it serves a purpose to remind us all, many of you will come and go. There'll be different counselors. So I think having a record is helpful, certainly to me and staff, as we bring this forward through the annual budget process. Say, hey, remember when, this is why it's in front of you. So I think it serves a purpose for the Downs team to say, hey, you've got a partner here. And secondarily, it serves a historical purpose of kind of setting expectations.
Any other comments? Councilor Clucci?
Yeah, so another reason for doing this, and I struggled with this, Ken, I didn't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, but I'm comfortable with it now. In order to activate the state funds or have access to state funds, you need a partnership between the town and a private entity. And this helps to symbolize, or I guess memorialize that we are intending to work together. It's not just the Downs, like it's essentially the way I'm interpreting it is the state saying these projects need to happen before you can allow the Downs to grow any more than they are. And it's in our interest. We've been saying we're going to do it for a long time. It's in their interest. So, and the state's willing to kick in for some of the costs if we are able to work together.
And it's worth noting perhaps, because I don't know that it's always appreciated. The Downs, and by no fault of theirs, would have preferred to simply pay impact fees as they have in the past and others have done before them. It's kind of a lot simpler, kind of pay as you go, if you will. DOT as part of this said, no, you're actually gonna have to physically do the improvements and you're gonna have to do it in 3 years. So it's really a sea change in terms of, and we were quite surprised and somewhat pleased, I guess, in how hard line DOT took the position that talk is cheap, you're collecting money, nothing's getting done. So they really use this opportunity to leverage local monies, the state put money in, and significant private investment If the Downs simply paid impact fees and were allowed to do that, it would be $5 million cheaper to them than the current value or cost of the improvements that they're now required to make. So it would have been easier and cheaper. But I think we're going to all benefit, including them, but all of our residents will benefit from actual physical improvement. And I think we'll see actual practical improvement in terms of traffic flow across 38 intersections, most of which are in Scarborough.
Council Hamel?
Yeah, this is sort of a bit of a question. So I know we've got a lot of data here, but I think what we want to be certain is that we're going to be enabling those funds from the state to be used or to be activated, as the wording has been so far. But, you know, according to the information, we've got somewhere to the tune of almost, I guess, $3 million that are in reserve accounts, covering, you know, those 4 projects on Payne Road and 1 on Oak Hill. And there are some aspect of those that are related to the Downs. You know, the Downs, you know, impact is having an effect on those areas. So, and that the Downs has contributed a total of about $217,000 so far toward that close to $3 million total. So, you know, I think that the trick is we need to be able to be sure that we have some sort of trail on the funding here in terms of source of funds, the impact fees, and then who's paying what, and then is that really fair to the Downs? Is it fair to the town? Is it fair to other people that are, you know, that have paid impact fees? And those are big questions we can't possibly answer tonight, or even with the revised, you know, order that's in front of us, but this would at least start us on that path. And I think we just follow up with reviewing the flow of funds and the sources and the purposes, as I've mentioned. But this is pretty complicated, and we're going to be doing this over and over again, I'm guessing, as we move through this, this development and other developments.
Not if you give me appropriation authority tonight.
Well, that's what you went for, right? Any others? Councilor,
I just forgot and wanted to add that this was discussed at the Transportation Committee last week, and you know that at least that citizen committee had a lot of support for, you know, moving these projects forward. So I think they would be in full support of making sure the town is contributing funds to support these specific projects that came up in the TMP.
Thank you. So I just want to make sure I like keeping things light, but I want to be sure if we're giving Tom the appropriations authority tonight and he plans to use that as he's implied.
Oh,
then
we're not. That was
no,
we're not.
No, you're not.
I think he tried to. We said,
thank you.
Yeah.
And as I proposed that, I wasn't going to be spending those monies today. I would spend them as needed in accordance with the work plan. So it would be on the same schedule that you'll see them through the budget. It was just kind of once and done as opposed to 5 different times.
Any others? No? Okay. With that, Tracy?
Council Fuji,
Yes.
Council Johnson,
No.
Council Anderson,
Yes.
Council Hamel,
Yes.
Council Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
No. Okay, with that, I am on to order number 21085. It's an act on the names posted to the various committee boards as recommended by the Appointments and Negotiations Committee at the Town Council meeting on September 15th, 2021. Mr. Hamel, I believe this is you. This is my life, every meeting, all
Sorry,
meeting.
yeah,
No, it's
yeah.
okay. Take
I
your
had my
time.
place before the last item and I lost it, so my apologies. Thanks, Tom. When all else fails, fall back to paper and pencil. This is a second reading of the posting from the Appointments and Negotiations Committee for a couple of appointments for the Town Council to approve. For the Coastal Waters and Harbor Committee, appoint Mr. Alfred Falzone as a second alternate with a term to expire 2022. And for the Transportation Committee, appoint Mr. Craig Robinson as the first alternate with a term to expire 2023. So that's for our second.
I think it's just
our
an
vote.
act. Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
second notice, yes.
Is there a second
Second?
discussion? Tracy?
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Order number 20086 is the first reading and schedule a public hearing and second reading on the proposed amendments to chapter 311, the Town of Scarborough Schedule of Fees. Jay, you want to? We've seen this before, correct? Or
Nope, this
No,
is,
okay.
this is
No,
first
it's
reading. Yeah, and so this really, it is part and parcel of the solar, utility scale solar ordinance. Really, as we started working through the process, we were trying to determine what would be an appropriate fee structure. And so really, we've spent some time, the sustainability coordinator in town, our zoning administrator, looking at what surrounding communities have done and with respects to fees with the large scale solar arrays, as well as what we thought our time might be in terms of effort and resources required. And so that's really what you have before you. There's really three separate components. There's the first step, someone has to submit to the planning board. So there's a planning board application piece in there, which is $500. And then there's an electric permit piece, which is done on I've got it right here. I think that's done on a kilowatt hour. Is that the one that is? Yes, it is. Yep. That's based on kilowatt hours. And then we have a building permit because ultimately the code officers will have to go out and inspect footings and such. And so we do that on essentially a by array. You can sort of buy a group of arrays. I think they're in 25 or 50 increments by. So that's the structure for you.
Thank you.
Without getting into the actual detailed
Yes, right.
numbers, which
I think that was perfect.
all right.
Any questions for Jay? Okay, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Tracy?
Counselor Fuji,
Yes.
Counselor Johnson,
Yes.
Counselor Anderson,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Order number 21087 is a first reading and schedule a public hearing and second reading on the proposed new chapter 420, the Town of Scarborough Temporary Authorizations of Outdoor Services. This has been before us before, but I believe we let it lapse, so we just have to start it again instead of renew it. Tom, is that a correct statement or?
Not quite right.
Okay, go ahead, then you correct me.
Yes, the council will likely recall way back, kind of early pandemic, if you will, back in May of 2020, the council passed an emergency ordinance. That emergency ordinance process is part of your charter. That emergency ordinance was extended twice and is due to expire at the end of October this year, 2021. Unfortunately, as we looked at extending it once again, and the reason for that is we're still experiencing some of the challenges with the pandemic and looking for outdoor opportunity and spacing, if you will. We realized that the actual language of the charter says that a emergency ordinance is actually automatically repealed on the 91st day. So it's intended to be short term. So the two extensions that we've had and the one that we're currently working on, frankly, is not lawful. We do see the need to extend this into the spring for a couple of reasons. One, as I said, we're still experiencing challenges. In addition, we expect many of the businesses that had taken advantage of this will likely want to continue, not all. And to do so, they will likely need site plan approval changes. And so in consultation with Jay and his staff, they'll need some months to kind of get their house in order. And what we're proposing is actually passing an actual ordinance that has a sunset at the end of May 2022. That will really give them additional time to kind of figure out what they want to do long-term, and if so, to come forward and get valid approval so they can do something similar to, if not exactly what they've been doing over the last 18 months. In the interest of time, we would look for this to be certainly following your normal adoption process. Tonight is first reading. I would respectfully suggest you hold public hearing and second reading next in 2 weeks, really so we can get this in place and make the use that they're enjoying lawful going forward.
Thank you, sir. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? Council Hamel?
Yeah, I'm in favor of this for several reasons. First and foremost, for the health and sanity of people that want to be outside and be able to take advantage of services like this, and also for the benefit of the local businesses that will need some sort of economic activity. So we're pretty hardy, and we'll get out the down gear and look for outdoor heaters that they'll be moving around. So I'm in favor of this. Got to have someplace to go this winter, out of the house.
We can always schedule more as council meetings. Any other?
Did not come to mind.
Councilor Clucci and then Councilor Johnson.
Yeah, I think one of the positives that come from the pandemic is people are getting outside in the winter now in Maine, and it's, there's stuff that you can do. So maybe it's not always going to be temporary in nature, and we need a transition. But I think there's going to be an appetite for this type of thing for longer than just a couple of months.
Councilor Johnson, do you have your hand raised? No.
I definitely support this. I just saw where Portland is actually considering making all their cobble streets now pedestrian only because of the success of the outdoor eating during the pandemic. And my wife and I do eat out a lot. We only eat outside, so we need to have this ordinance. Thank you.
Okay, Tracy?
Yes.
Yes.
Council Anderson.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Council Katarina.
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Order number 21. Jay, have a good night. See you in like 7 hours. Order number 21089 is an act on the request to set a date, time, and location for the municipal elections of the Tuesday, November 2nd, 2021 at the Scarborough High School Alumni Gym. Appoint the warden and deputy warden, set the hours for voter registration, and act on the appointments of the election ballot clerks pursuant to Chapter 200, Article 8, nominations and elections, and authorize the town clerk to make any additional appointments as necessary. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Discussion? Tracy?
Council Clucci.
Yes.
Council Johnson.
Yes.
Council Anderson.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Council Katarina.
Yes.
Chairman Johnson.
Yes. Item number 10 is standing and special committee reports and liaison reports. Does anybody have anything to report? Councilor Katarina.
Well, this is sort of an unofficial firing range committee. I am the chair of it. We haven't met in a while, but I just wanted to notify the town council. I sent you an email today invite where Scarborough Fish and Game is opening up their skeet shooting. They've been working on it for a couple of years. And they are having a special event. It's a private event, but we've all been invited. And if you could let me know within the next day or two if you plan to attend, so that they will know. And as an aside, I do want to let you know, I know it's public knowledge now because it's closed, so I can say this, that the Scarborough Fish and Game did buy the Beach Ridge Speedway land that was in the RF zone that's along the river and encompasses some resource protection also. And they closed on, I believe it was last week. So
Nice.
I forget, yeah, I
Any-
don't know the number of the acreage, but just so
Any-
you know. That's it.
I have two quick things. One, just so the public knows, to repeat, we do have a workshop next week. It's a special date for, we're looking for some sort of consultant and or agent to help us with this next phase of the Downs development and really just going forward for all of the big questions that we have.
5:30, right?
Yep, 5:30.
Jean Marie needs to be there. at
Yes,
5:30.
Jean Marie has to be there at 5:30, correct. And that's also the downtown committee report out. In the interest of transparency, the way that worked is John Anderson wrote up an initial crack and an RFP, and then essentially he sends it to a few of us and we give comments on a Google Doc. So there are times, very few actually, in the 3 years I've been here, but there was people just actively making comments on Google Docs. You'll see the product of that next week, because that's probably our launching point. So those are the only two things I had. But special thanks to Council Anderson for doing that. Between this and the comp plan, he's kind of the big picture guy. He's really good at bringing us through these big, large projects and just slowly navigating. So I really do appreciate it. So with that, other council comments? Motion to adjourn?
Second,
Tracy?
Council Pucci.
yes.
Council Johnson.
Yes.
Council Anderson.
Yes.
Council Hamel.
Yes.
Council Katarina.